Well, hey, how's it going? Yes, we are back again 2 weeks in a row. We're on a roll. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about with y'all today. If you are also drawn to true crime, and you also want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together, usually every other Tuesday, where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. Yes, we are here for part 2, and yeah, as you can see, I kind of mixed up the set a little bit. I wanted to make some more storage in the bathroom, and yeah, it's kind of pathetic. This isn't even like a quarter of my makeup collection. I'm really pathetic. I know, it's sad. It's sad. I do still do some adjustments, but yeah, I kind of like it. Yeah, today we are doing part 2 of the Bellevue murders, and yeah, I'm not going to do a bunch of preamble, all right, because there is so much to get into. This is a long one, all right, and like with part 1, just, yeah, be forewarned, we're talking about graphic stuff here, so there's going to be like graphic details and maybe some bad language and stuff, so yeah, just be aware. All right, so if you remember, right, part 1, we went into everyone that is involved in the case, the Wilson family, unfortunately, our victims, and our 2 perpetrators, David and Alex. And we left off part 1, right, where police discovered Kimberly's body. And they were going to go head to her home to inform her family because they found her, I believe it was her wallet on her, I believe I said, right? Oh, no, excuse me, checkbook, duh. Sorry, it's kind of early when I'm feeling right now, and I'm just, like, yeah, you can see I look more haggard than usual. I've got this nasty blemish. I didn't sleep well, so sorry. I hope I'm not too scatterbrained. So let's pick up where we left off, all right? They were going to head to the Wilson home, all right? And that was Detective Gomez, Prosecutor Eakes, and then the 2 Emmys who had Kimberly's body in their van. So they were heading to the Wilson house, and that is where we will pick up. So when they arrived at the Wilson home, all of the interior lights were off, as we know, despite there being 2 cars parked in the driveway, so it clearly looked like, there at least should have been someone home, right? And the fact that, remember, the Christmas lights were on. If you remember, Kim's friend Claire had turned them on because she was waiting outside their house for them. So they pull up, and yeah, already kind of weird that, everything looks off, but the Christmas lights are on and there's cars in the driveway, so it's kind of weird. So they get out of the car and notice that the shades are drawn. And Detective Gomez said that as soon as he stepped out of the car, he just felt something was wrong. There was like something in the air. You know what I mean? He noticed the family's golden retriever, Mo, was laying down in the front yard, and as he approached the dog, it started whimpering, but it didn't bark at Gomez or anything. Now, Eakes, who was following Gomez, she immediately thought that was odd, because she had always heard that golden retrievers were pretty territorial, especially of their homes and stuff, and like, if a stranger approached, they would at least start barking, so she thought that was kind of weird. And neither of them would notice the blood on Mo until later that day. So, of course, they knocked, rang the doorbell, no answer, trying to look in the windows, shades are drawn, knocking again, nobody is answering. They went all around the house trying to peer into any of the windows, seeing if any shades were open so they could see, like, what was going on, but all they saw inside was just darkness. So they proceeded to go to the next door neighbor and see if maybe they knew where the Wilsons were. The next door neighbor was Barbara Sarbre, and she told the detectives, like, oh no, the cars are there, like, they should totally be home. I mean, yeah, if the cars weren't there, I would say, yeah, they're not home, but yeah, they should be there. That's weird. She did tell them, though, that it was odd that Mo was out front. He was an older dog. Rose never let him off leash, and he had just had hip surgery recently, so it was very odd he was running around without supervision. So as Barbara got Mo into her home, just to kind of, get him out of the way and whatnot, Gomez and Eakes went around to the back of the Wilson home, and that's where Marquis and Raven were, the Emmys who had Kimberly's body in their Emmy van. So they all meet up back there. And that's when Marquis informed them, like, hey, the sliding glass door right here is just, like, wide open. Eakes would later say, quote, there was a definite part of me that thought something might be wrong, but he couldn't fathom what Gomez was going to find. It was just like, something's funny here. These people are gone. It was all dark in the house. It was in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday. You would have the lights on. And just reading that quote from Eakes, I totally forgot to remind you, remember, I'm getting most of my information from this book right here, Deadly Secrets by Putzata Rie Yang. I hope I said her name right. If I am not, please correct me in the comments. I'm sure you will. But yeah, I totally forgot to inform you guys. Yes, I read this book, and this is where I got a bulk of the information, and as usual, newspaper articles. So as we're sitting there, Eeks is like, all right, Gomez, go ahead and go inside and search the house. There's enough probable cause here that, like, you should be fine. So that is exactly what Gomez did with his gun drawn, of course, right? Because, like, you don't know, like, what's going on, right? And so, of course, right? So Gomez entered the home, gun drawn, and he was, of course, met with a horrid, just putrid, metallic smell, right? And we know what it was. He asked if anyone was home and identified himself, asking if anyone was there, but he received no response. So the Wilsons' home was sort of like a 3-story home, and it was kind of interesting. I think it's pretty common in the Pacific Northwest. Let me know. So the first floor contained like the kitchen. So Gomez went ahead and cleared that floor, and then he proceeded to the second floor. And that is where like the dining room and stuff was, and he was looking for any signs of life, and there was, nobody or nothing there. So he entered the third floor, turned right, and proceeded towards the hall. And as he's walking down the hall, he peered into a bedroom that was towards the hall, and he was, of course, met with a battered body lying in between the doorway and the hallway, covered and caked in blood. And that's when he shouted out, "One dead." He, of course, had found Julia. Now, at first, when Eeks heard Gomez yell, "One dead," she thought maybe he was joking or something, because they kind of had that kind of relationship. They had that kind of humor with each other. So at first, she was like, wait, is he being serious, or is he kind of screwing with me? So inside, Gomez checked the closets and the doors, making sure, there's no one behind, any bedroom doors or something. And as we know, as he made his way further down the hallway, he came upon the master bedroom. Inside, he saw, of course, the 2 bodies of Bill and Rose. Bill was slumped at the foot of the bed, and Rose was lying in bed. They were both, of course, just caked in blood, and that's when Gomez shouted out, "2 more dead." He then went downstairs to inform the others of, what he had found and to start securing the crime scene and all that stuff, right? They did proceed to go back inside with Gomez just to kind of look and see what he had found. And Eeks said, quote, "Frankly, I was afraid. I was unarmed. There were no cops there except Gomez. At this juncture, we had no idea if whoever killed them was still in the house." Now, they didn't really enter the bedrooms or anything like that because they didn't want to contaminate the crime scene. They just wanted to see what Gomez had discovered, and they was oh shit, yeah, we gotta lock this down. Eeks described what Julia's body looked like. Quote, "I just remember a lot of blood. Her face looked completely distorted, what I could see of it. She was pretty battered." And she described what she saw when she peered into the master bedroom. Quote, "The woman was lying just like she was sleeping, except the whole side of her head was caved in." One thing they all noticed quite clearly was a clear footprint from a boot on the back of Bill's shirt, and it was stamped in blood, and it was very distinct, very obvious. The 4 then exited the home and started, calling for backup to secure everything, secure search warrants and all that stuff, lock it down. And Detective Gomez said at that moment, quote, "I started thinking about what needed to be done and trying to process how this was connected to the girl in the park. You think you've identified everybody. You don't know if some other family member did it and is missing. Is this murder-suicide? Is this a quadruple murder, which happens so rarely?" And so we now have 2 separate crime scenes to work, right? The park and the Wilson home. So because of that, Lieutenant Edward Mott ordered 2 separate investigations be conducted. Detective Jerry Johnson would oversee the park case and Kimberly's body where she was found, and Detective Robert Thompson would be in charge of the crime scene at the Wilson home. Now, police actually would not enter the Wilson home again until about 8 p.m. that evening because, like I said earlier, right? You got to secure all your search warrants and stuff. It was a Sunday and whatnot. So it did take some time to gather all that stuff. But at 8 p.m. that night, the police then were able to thoroughly go into the Wilson home. Now, as Thompson proceeded through the house, he first went to the master bedroom, and he described that there was just so much blood everywhere. Not only were the bodies caked in blood, it had seeped into their skin, because it had been just so thick and laying there, for a few days. There was blood splattered on the ceiling, on the walls, all over the bedspread and comforter and stuff. And yeah, he was saying it was a truly nightmarish. He saw Rose in the bed, and it was ultimately determined that she did die from blunt force trauma to her head. The force of the impact to her head had actually shattered her skull, which had crushed her brain, and this was the specific injury that killed Rose. She was still in her nightgown, of course, and she had been so badly beaten that, like, her head was completely misshapen. In fact, the right side of the skull had been caved in like 2 inches. Isn't that horrible? How horrifying. They would also discover that Rose's left hand also had bruising and blunt force trauma to it, and had obviously, you know, had so much force impacted on it that the stone had actually been knocked out of her wedding ring. Her head and neck were covered in stab wounds, and this is gonna get really graphic. More than once, the weapon had been forced all the way through her neck, piercing her left shoulder as it protruded out the other side. Yeah, isn't that awful? And due to the way that all of her injuries were like in neat kind of like clusters, it would ultimately be determined that Rose did in fact get murdered in her sleep. They concluded that if she did wake up at any point during the attack, it was like only for like 1 or 2 seconds, because that force to her brain that killed her, it's like instantaneous death. So I don't know, I guess small favors, I guess. Like, God, I hope she didn't suffer at all. That's awful. But Bill, on the other hand, oh my God, he suffered greatly. So, much like his wife, it was determined Bill died from blunt force and sharp force trauma. And much like his wife, most of his wounds were isolated to his head and neck. His skull had been cracked in triangular pieces, and he had suffered 12 stab wounds and cuts, along with other blunt force injuries. One of his stab wounds was 5.5 inches long. It started under his left ear, went deep through his neck, sliced through the spinal cord, and finally cut through an artery that supplies blood to the brain. And this injury right here would have specifically paralyzed Bill. He wouldn't be able to move. And they were able to determine that Bill, unfortunately, was alive when he received this wound. His skull had been stabbed through as well. In fact, the pathologist would find a tiny piece of metal stuck on a piece of Bill's skull. He actually had to cut it away, and that's when he, discovered it. Now, unlike with his wife, Bill's injuries were not in neat clusters, and that is because, he put up a fight. His wounds were all sporadically and chaotically distributed as he struggled with his attackers. Thompson, of course, noticed that obvious shoe print on the back of Bill's shirt was in blood. It was like a diamond sole, boot print. And yeah, Thompson was like, wait a minute, it was so obvious, he was like, did the killer purposely leave this here to taunt us or something? Because it was just so obvious. It was just what a weird thing to leave behind, right? He also saw a blood-smeared AmeriCorps bumper sticker that was on Bill's thigh, and it was splattered with blood, which he thought was really odd. He then proceeded to Julia's room, and as we said, her body laid in between the hallway and the entrance to her bedroom. Now, unlike with her parents, whose injuries told police that, they had been caught completely off guard, completely unawares, Julia's injuries indicated she had fought very hard with her attackers and struggled. Her right forearm was broken, and there were multiple defensive wounds all over her arms and legs. It was ultimately ruled she died from multiple stab wounds to the body. She had received a total of 24. 2 of her teeth had been knocked out, as if someone had, smacked her right in the face, either with a fist or an object. And the injuries on her head would result in 2 scenarios in the pathologist's mind. Either her head was grabbed and then repeatedly slammed onto the ground, or her head was on the ground and someone stomped her head. Those were the 2 scenarios he came up with for how she received those injuries. There was a large reddish bruise on her right foot. They presumed probably from someone stomping on it with a large boot. She had suffered 2 stab wounds to the left side of her chest, one of which was 1.5 inches long, and the other was 1/4 inch deep. She had several more stab wounds to her face and neck, which had sustained a total of 5 stab wounds. And it was one of those 5 stab wounds that ultimately killed her. That stab had cut a jugular, and she just bled out and lost massive amounts of blood, and that's what killed her. Another wound to her neck had actually went all the way through her trachea, severing her windpipe, which would render her unable to scream. Oh God, this is so horrifying. She also received 3 stab wounds to her left eye, and the knife had gone straight into the eye socket. One of the stabs went so deep, it actually collapsed the globe, and it caused the entire left side of her face right there to just collapse in on itself. There was a massive gaping cut wound on the top of Julia's head. It was described as a chopping motion. And from the size of it, the pathologist determined the weapon would have had to been very, very large, such as a sword. Like with Bill, they also found a piece of metal embedded in Julia's skull. And when the pathologist put those 2 pieces under the microscope, quote, "It appears that the 2 pieces of metal came from the same source, but the actual tip of the blade is in Mr. Wilson's skull, and then the second piece broken from the same blade is in Julia's skull," which of course told them that Bill had been attacked and killed first before Julia. Now, when Julia's body was examined, it was really starkly clear that, the killer or killers who did this to her really enjoyed it. It was determined that Julia had received many stab wounds even long after she was dead. So as police continued throughout the house and the living room, looking for any kind of clues, Thompson noticed the entertainment center, the living room on the 2nd floor, and he saw on the entertainment center some cords that were sticking out like they had been cut. He was like, oh, I wonder if there was a TV or a VCR there that had been stolen. And as he's make his way through this house, this case was starting to remind him of another infamous case from this area, one which we will cover this year at some point. And it was an infamous case where, a son and his friend were convicted of, murdering his family. And, so many things about what Thompson was finding at the Wilson home lined up with that case that he started wondering, I wonder if the Wilsons were also killed by someone they knew. So Detective Thompson, who did sit in on the autopsies of the Wilsons, explained how when he was, at the autopsies and stuff, and how all the injuries, all the information they gleaned, it really painted a picture of the killer or killers and just the kind of sick people they were. Quote, "I knew this was someone for whom killing had been its own motive. It was almost as if the people had died before the killers were gratified. They had to continue to mutilate them after their deaths because the mere act of killing was not adequate." So at the Wilson home crime scene, police would end up finding multiple pieces of evidence, including a set of footprints with a distinctive diamond sole pattern, along with a pair of black wool socks. Now, analyzing the blood spatter evidence and all that, right? They were able to determine that, hey, there was definitely more than one killer. And so when police got that information, they did a re-examination of the Wilson home looking for, any other evidence that would support that. And when they did, they actually found pieces of a black shirt in Julia's bedroom that they had missed initially, and it did not belong to any of the Wilsons. So, potentially a very vital clue. All right, as all of this is going on, right? As the police are securing their search warrants, I guess I should say, the 5 o'clock Sunday evening news ran, and they ran with the story of, the Wilson bodies being discovered. However, at this point, because it was the 5 p.m. newscast and police hadn't entered the house yet, there wasn't really a lot of information in the news report. They didn't even report that the bodies found in the home lived there or anything. And then, of course, didn't release names or anything because they didn't know anything. All the newscast stated was that there were 4 people murdered in the home and that police were investigating it as a homicide. And they also stated in the newscast that police had already told them that the motive didn't appear to be robbery because the house wasn't really ransacked or robbed all that much, So Prosecutor Beard, who, remember, we mentioned would assist Eakes in prosecuting this case, was also at the crime scenes, and he also spoke with medical examiners and also observed the autopsies when they were going on. And he would later talk to the press about, what he saw and what he thought of, the wounds and the type of picture that emerged after all that information had come out. Quote, "A picture emerged from the autopsies of the murders themselves. It was not a residential burglary that went awry. It became obvious the murders were committed by individuals who wanted to experience murder." However, all right, so when this 5 o'clock newscast airs and it doesn't really have a whole lot of information yet, Rose's mother, Julia Mahoney, was watching this newscast. And of course, the news reporter's reporting live on scene, she sees her daughter's house right behind the reporter, and she's like, oh my God, what the hell? oh my God, like, is this my daughter they're talking about? And just after the segment aired, Julia then got a call from Rose's best friend from college. Her name was Diana Funai. I hope I said that right. And she lived nearby, all right? And she had also seen the newscast, and that's why she'd immediately called up Julia, and both women were just like, oh my God, could this be Rose and her family? Julia noted that no one had picked up at her daughter's house all day Saturday or Sunday. She had tried to get a hold of them. She talked to her almost every day, so it was very, very weird. So Diana decided to pick Julia up, and they were going to drive over to Bellevue and see what was up. By the time they arrived there, it was 8 p.m., so the investigators were investigating the house at that moment. The media circus was, ongoing at that point, news cameras and stuff. When Julia spoke to one of the police officers, she informed them of who she was, and then she was brought back behind the scenes, not in the house, obviously. Gomez and Eakes, of course, questioned her about, have any enemies? Were there any problems? Kind of like the standard questions you would expect. And Julia had no answers. She was like, no, everything was fine. They didn't have enemies. I have no idea who could have done this. And even though Julia was like, pretty certain it was her family in the house, because the autopsies had not been conducted at that moment, Gomez and Eakes could neither confirm nor deny that it was Rose and her family in the house. Isn't that terrible? So poor Julia had to go home and wait for the official call. Oh, isn't that awful? Eakes would later say that she felt so terrible that Julia had found out through the news. Quote, that was probably the most emotional part of the whole thing. It was just awful to have this poor woman see it on TV. You feel terrible you couldn't identify anybody. Everybody told us the grandmother lived nearby, but no one knew where. Claire Hearn also appeared on scene. If you remember Claire, she was a good childhood friend from Kimberly and the Wilson family. So remember, Claire had been trying to get a hold of Kimberly as well, because she was supposed to fly back home to San Diego, and she couldn't get a hold of her. And so, that whole Sunday, day and evening, Claire was wondering, about her friend and, what happened? Did her parents take her to the airport? What happened? So she decided to go by the Wilson home. And of course, that's when she saw all the media spectacle going around. She asked an officer what had happened, and she was like, oh my God, I know who lives in that home, So of course, officers then took her aside and questioned her about what she knew. They asked her, hey, do you know anyone who, do they have any enemies or anything like that? And Claire said no, but the only thing she could think of was something that Kim had confided in her about a year ago. Kimberly had told Claire that a guy that she had briefly dated in middle school and high school named David Anderson and his friend Alex were planning on committing a crime. Kimberly didn't tell her what kind of crime, just that they were planning some sort of crime. And this would be the first time that police and detectives would hear the names David and Alex. And this is also when they would first hear about the Denny's Club, as Claire filled them in on, Kimberly's friends and, social circles and stuff like that. Claire said that Kimberly had always spoken very fondly of David, described him as, charming, good-looking, funny, charismatic, adventurous. And she said Kimberly liked the fact that he never followed a crowd. He just did his own thing. Alex, on the other hand, David's friend, was another story. Claire said that Kimberly described him as unfriendly, cold, shadowy, long, greasy hair, and he always followed David around everywhere that he went. Claire said that Kim thought he was eerie and solemn, and claimed that he even creeped out some other members of the Denny's Club. Quote, Kim was scared of Alex. She thought he was creepy, and this is what Claire told the officer. So Gomez and Eakes would end up interviewing Claire the next day, as she gave them just kind of more details about, Kim's life and stuff, and, her relationship with David and whatnot. She would also end up showing them, around Bellevue, the water tower park where a lot of them hung out. She showed them where David lived. She couldn't show them where Alex lived because she didn't even know his last name. She just knew that his name was Alex. Meanwhile, as all of that was going down on that same Sunday, Alex and David spent all day in character, oblivious as to what was going on. And at the end of the night, they went their separate ways. David went home and went to sleep, while Alex, who, if you'll remember from part 1, was renting a room at Ron and Valerie Boyd's house. He was friends with their son Bob. So he headed to the Boyd's home, and there he watched the news with Bob, the 11 o'clock news. And by that point in time, that was where more of the detailed information had come out, Beard talking to the newscast and stuff about the autopsies and whatnot. There was a lot more information on that newscast. And, Bob, when he saw it, he was like, oh my God, what the hell? It was a trip for him. He didn't really know Kimberly, but He knew of her. He knew that David really knew her. And so he was like, whoa, like what happened? And he started peppering Alex with questions because he assumed since David and Kimberly were friends that David would have, known what was going on and had informed Alex about it all. But Alex only chuckled and told him, quote, "Don't look at me, dude. I didn't do it." So the next day, on Monday, detectives immediately began canvassing the neighborhood and area, interviewing neighbors. Anyone see anything? Right? Standard investigation 101. They would end up speaking to about 100 neighbors. And yeah, neighbors kind of said all the same thing, that the Wilson family had lived in the area for several years. Both had daughters. They swam on the swim team. Bill and Rose were avid University of Washington Huskies fans, always donning like their gear and going to games and stuff. And there didn't really seem to be any problems. They said their older daughter had moved away. And, though for the most part, they were average happy, no drama or anything, there was an incident where the police were called to the Wilson home a few days before the murders. So on December 26th, 1996, Kimberly, I guess, had lost her driving privileges while she was home. Don't know the details about that, just that she lost her driving privileges. So she was relying on her parents and her sister to drive her around. And on this night, it was around midnight, and Kimberly wanted her parents to drive her somewhere, and they didn't want to, and so, like, a fight ensued, like an argument, right? And so Bill, as a joke, picked up the phone and said that he was going to call 911, and so he did dial 911, but he hung up the phone before it even rang. However, the call did go through. So, of course, the 911 dispatcher, dispatched an officer to at least go check it out. And in his report, the officer noted, quote, "After talking with the involved persons, it was determined that the argument was really about mom and dad being unhappy with their daughter's career choice." Police also found a local resident named Ricky Nelson, and he actually lived near the Water Tower Park. And he said he saw two people sitting on a dark-colored pickup truck in the parking lot of the park that Friday evening around 12:20 a.m. or so, the evening/morning of the murders. Local resident Dawn Stansfield rented the Wilsons' former home, and she told police that there were rumors that Kimberly was dabbling in drugs and that she had started hanging out with a rough crowd the last year or so, and she thought maybe that had something to do with it, like a drug deal gone bad or something. Bill's co-workers said, he was well-liked and, all that stuff. There was no issues there. No co-workers had any issues with him. Co-workers said the same thing about Rose. Hortensia Bram was the administrative assistant at the AmeriCorps base in San Diego, where Kimberly was. And she told police that Kimberly was one of 300 people who had joined the AmeriCorps that past September, and, quote, was very well thought of. Nobody had any issues with her. Julia's classmates at Bellevue High School described her as, quiet, shy, and reserved. She didn't have any enemies or anything. They could think of nothing that could explain how, she would be involved in something like this. So since Kimberly had gone to the same high school, of course, the counselor was able to tell them a little bit about the struggles that Kimberly had like the last year of high school, like how she was kind of conflicting with her parents about like her life path and whatnot, which, just added to what the neighbors had already told them. So we mentioned earlier that Gomez and Eakes interviewed Claire, and that she would fill them in on more details of like Kimberly's life, her social circle, David, and where he usually hung out, and, showed them around Bellevue and all that. She was also able to inform them about Kim's bisexuality, being gay. Like, she informed them that Kim was having like these questions and concerns and thoughts about her life. She gave them the name of two girlfriends Kimberly had dated, Sky Stewart and Sarah Lamp. Gomez then sat down to tracking down Sky just to see what she knew, last time she saw Kimberly and all that stuff. So Sky had actually been working all day that Sunday, so she was completely unaware of what had happened. So when Gomez had, called her that Monday to discuss what happened, he was the one that had to break it to her. And the next day, on Tuesday, January 7th, police would end up getting the first big break in the case. So the principal at Bellevue High School, his name was Kevin Wolf, he phoned up the BPD and said, "Hey, I've got two students here who really want to talk to police about the murder that just happened. They think they have some information." So Gomez sent the husband-wife detective team of Detective John McBride and Officer Molly McBride. So they went to the high school to see who and what these two students had to share. And when they arrived, they met with the two students. It was two girls named Danielle Barry and Amryn Decker. Yep, remember, David's ex-girlfriends. So the girls told the McBrides that when they heard about the Wilson murders, both of them immediately kind of like came to the same conclusion, and that was that David probably had something to do with it, and this was based on, right, all the things that he had told them at different times. He had boasted to each of them about his plan to kill someone, right? Especially before he turned 18, because he thought he would get a lesser sentence. I guess he had told them that, yeah, he somehow believed that Washington law would enable him to kill someone at 17 and then be released on his 21st birthday. But yeah, he was woefully misinformed on that law and how it worked. The girls said they didn't know who he planned to kill, and they didn't know Kimberly Wilson at all, but they did know that David had a falling out with her. And over the course of a year, both girls said that they saw the developing anger and hatred that David had towards this Kimberly person. And neither of them could tell them why David hated Kimberly so much. They couldn't tell him. They had no idea. But of course we know, right? All Danielle and Amryn knew was that David most certainly had something to do with the Wilson murders, and police should really check him out. On Wednesday, January 8th, the official causes of death were released to the public. The King County Medical Examiner, right, concluded that Kimberly had been strangled to death while her family had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. Police also said at this time that they believed this attack was targeted. Quote, "We made it clear we do not believe this was a random act and that a killer is not running loose committing indiscriminate crimes." And this was according to the Bellevue Police Department Lieutenant Bill Ferguson. So, this same Wednesday, around noon, Gomez sent the McBrides to interview this David Anderson guy. Let's see what's up with this guy, let's check him out. So, the McBrides pulled up to David's home that he rented with his brother and his girlfriend. And if you remember, because David went through quite a few girlfriends, his girlfriend at this time is Marcia Joy Rash. So, Mike answered the door, invited police in, and he went to go wake up David, who was asleep. Marcia was in the living room, watching another friend named Joe Kern play the Nintendo. David then stumbled into the room, clearly having been, woken up and was half asleep. He sat next to Marcia, and as the McBrides, primarily Molly, questioned David, he seemed very relaxed, nonchalant, almost like maybe he was about to fall asleep, like he just didn't really care that someone he knew, had known for a while, was murdered. Like, he was very cool and nonchalant about everything. So after they were done interviewing David, they left, and then the McBrides radioed Gomez and was like, yeah, I don't think this David kid is our guy. He doesn't really have anything to offer. Molly even told him, quote, "This isn't the guy we want." However, the McBrides had neglected to get alibis from anyone at David's home, so Gomez sent them right back to get alibis. By that point in time, everybody was out front in the front yard smoking cigarettes. So, McBrides came and asked them, asked everyone where they were. Mike said that on the night of the murders, he had worked, and then later he had gone out dancing with friends. Marcia said that she had been work all evening until David picked her up at the Radio Shack in Factoria at 9:30. She informed them that David was driving her stepfather's black pickup truck, and that when he picked her up from work, he dropped her off at home. And she said once she got home, she went straight to bed. David said that after he had dropped Marcia off, he went to his friend Alex's house, where they played video games until about 5 a.m. Joe said that he spent all Saturday playing D&D, but that's when David interrupted him. Quote, "No, Joe, you and me and Alex played D&D all day Sunday." The McBrides then asked everyone to lift their shoes. They were looking, remember, for that diamond sole pattern of like the boot. None of them match, it was all like kind of like smoother patterns and stuff. The McBrides then asked David and Mike if they had any other shoes in the house. They did. Could they bring them out? And they explained that they were just trying to eliminate all of Kim's friends and acquaintances as suspects. And Mike and David complied, and there was no match. There were no boots. There were no diamond-soled patterned boots. The McBrides then asked the Anderson brothers if they wouldn't mind going down to the station to be photographed and fingerprinted, again, just so they could be eliminated as suspects, and both Andersons agreed. I don't think they asked Joe or Marcia down there because they didn't know Kimberly. And apparently, at this point in time, I don't know if the laws changed since then, but at this point in time, in 1997, in Washington State, officers do not have to get parental permission to fingerprint a minor if the minor volunteers to do so. And on the way to the station, it is said David just seemed, totally relaxed, and, it was no big thing. He was not acting suspicious at all. Which, given, everything that we talked about David in part 1, I'm not really surprised by that, are you? Also on the way to the station, David, gave them Alex's address too, even pointing out the house where he rented a room at. So later that same evening, the McBrides then stopped by the Boyd house to talk to Alex. Alex answered the door and immediately led them to his bedroom, and there they talked. Alex said yes, he was aware of the murders. He had seen it on the news. When asked if Kimberly was a friend, Alex said not really, she was more David's friend. And he also told them that he actually didn't really care for her all that much. Quote, she was selfish, she would never share her cigarettes with me. He answered very calmly, nonchalantly, just like David, and he seemed completely unfazed that someone he knew, even tangentially, had been brutally murdered. So as Molly McBride asked Alex about his alibi, John McBride started taking kind of a stock of Alex's bedroom, and he noticed in the corner there was a big sword propped up, leaned against the wall. He then noticed a bunch of gashes and cuts and all kinds of damage to Alex's furniture and even the walls. And when John McBride asked Alex about that, Alex said, oh yeah, he practiced swinging his swords indoors, and that's what that damage was from. Alex then gave his alibi. Quote, me and David were here playing video games. David came in the evening and he went home around 5 a.m., lining up perfectly with what David said, right? So a few hours later, Detective John McBride returned to the Boyd residence, this time accompanied with Detective Thompson. They wanted to know if Alex would agree to come down to the station to, like with David and Mike, be photographed and fingerprinted to be eliminated as a suspect. And Alex agreed, and they asked him if he wouldn't mind bringing that sword with him, and he happily agreed. So they drove down to the station, and as McBride took Alex to go get processed and stuff, Thompson pulled out the sword, right? He unsheathed it, and when he unsheathed it, a bunch of dust just flew everywhere. So clearly, the sword had not been used in some time. Meanwhile, McBride was having kind of a difficulty getting a fingerprint sample from Alex. His hands were very, very sweaty, and whenever he would try to put Alex's finger, on the paper, it would smudge. And after, several tries, they were able to get, one partial, and they were just you know what, forget it, we'll try this another time. It is said McBride at this point didn't think David or Alex were what they were looking for. He thought that it was a waste of time to look at them. So after David and Alex had given their alibis that Wednesday, they assumed that they were off the hook and they'd gotten away with it, and they proceeded with their lives just as usual. Meanwhile, as the police were, investigating the homicides, Gomez was interested in David and Alex. He didn't care what McBride thought. He was pretty certain David and Alex, there was something there. So Gomez then called up Detective Thompson on the next day, and that was Thursday, January 9th. And remember, he had been holed up in the Wilson residence. He was in charge of that crime scene, so that's where he was. And Gomez asked him, hey, will you stop by and talk to this Alex kid when you're done at the crime scene there? And so that's what Thompson did. So he ended up driving to the Boyd residence around 4 p.m. that day. Now, he thought Alex was kind of a strange kid, but he didn't really get, homicide killer, vibes from him. He just thought he was a little weird. So when Thompson knocked, Bob answered. And as he led Thompson into the house, he informed him that, Alex wasn't home. He was at work. And as Bob was leading Thompson, through the hall or whatever, telling him that Alex wasn't home, Thompson noticed Bob's big, heavy, black combat boots that he was wearing. Thompson asked Bob where he had gotten those boots, and Bob said at the mall. Thompson then asked Bob to lift his feet, and Bob complied. And at that moment, Thompson, nearly, fell over because Bob's pattern on the bottom of those boots was diamond sole. It was the perfect pattern for what they were looking for. Thompson said, quote, I'm thinking this could be our killer right here. That's what he was thinking when he first saw that. It was just whoa, is this our killer? Thompson then asked Bob if Alex had these same boots. And Bob answered, quote, yeah, he has a pair exactly like mine. He saw me wearing them one day and asked me where I got them. He wanted a pair just like them. And of course, right, this is raising all kinds of red flags in Thompson's mind. And it was because, remember the previous day, right? The McBrides had interviewed Alex, and they asked him if the shoes he was wearing at that moment were the only pair he owned, and he had told them yes. Bob then told Detective Thompson the last time he had seen Alex the night of the murders, and it was around 10 p.m., if you remember. And when Thompson asked Bob if there had been anyone else in the home, Bob directed him to his Aunt Christine, who, remember, was trying to watch 2020 the night of the murders, and was very annoyed that Alex and David were, like, going in and out and slamming the door. So she reiterated what she had seen that night, and she told the detective that the boys had left the house about 10 p.m. And I'm assuming that she didn't realize that they didn't actually leave at that moment. Remember, they were out there by the truck just smoking cigarettes and talking. They were waiting for later in the night. So I'm going to assume that Christine was not aware of that. Now, everything that Christine and Bob had told him was raising all kinds of alarms in Thompson's mind, right? Primarily because both David and Alex said that they hadn't left the Boyd residence at all that night, remember? Thompson then asked Christine to please call him when Alex got home from work. Thompson then rushed back to the police department to relay everything that he had discovered and what he thought to Gomez and Beard. They decided at that moment that they were going to bring Alex in for a second interview. At 6 p.m., Christine called Detective Thompson to let him know that Alex was now home, and so he left with Prosecutor Beard to go pick up Alex. He was in the shower when they arrived, and so they kind of poked their head in the shower and just announced themselves. Alex said that he would be right out. And the book states that at this point, Alex was actually kind of nervous. When Alex got out, he tried inviting the officers into his room where they could talk, and they said, you know what? We think it would be better to go down to the station and talk. And so Alex left with them. Meanwhile, at the same time, Detective Johnson was bringing David down to the station for another interview. So Thompson and Beard would sit down with Alex in an interrogation room. Thompson pulled up a chair right next to Alex, right? Because they got to start the tactics, right? And he flat out told Alex that he knew he was lying about owning a second pair of boots. And he knew that he was lying about him and David not going out that Friday night. Thompson said that as soon as he said this, Alex's, body language and, demeanor, his whole mood instantly changed. He went from being sort of, relaxed and nonchalant to, being very, sitting upright, his mouth and chin quivering, he was obviously very nervous, he was not doing a good job of hiding it. Thompson said, quote, he looked like a mountain about ready to erupt. Right then, I go, this guy did it. And Thompson then attempted to interrogate Alex with, I guess it's a tactic that they use in interrogation of fast talking, I'm guessing just kind of peppering them with words and stuff. Quote, he was all defenses. That's what I had to break down. I had to get his arms unfolded. He clammed up. There was a wall there I had to take down. I couldn't let him keep the wall. I had to keep chipping away at it. So after about 15 to 20 minutes of incessant rambling and talking by Thompson, to Alex, remember Thompson is sitting right there, Alex said that he was ready to talk, but he needed a couple of minutes. Thompson left the room to join Gomez and Johnson, who remember had brought in David, and they had been listening in on Alex's interrogation. So after a couple of minutes, Thompson re-entered the room. He was accompanied by Prosecutor Beard. He sat right down next to Alex, again, just like he had before, and he began applying pressure. It took about 15 minutes. Quote, he was just sitting there gritting his teeth, and finally, Alex broke. His face turned red, his head and shoulders slumped, he had admitted the jig was up, and he asked what would happen to him if he confessed. And since Beard was the prosecutor, Thompson said, well, he should probably answer that. And Beard told Alex that, well, you wouldn't be a candidate for the death penalty, but, other than that, I can't make any guarantees. He then asked Alex, quote, Alex, have you ever had this experience where it's as if you're watching yourself do something and the events seem to be unfolding in and of themselves? And Alex replied, oh my God, yeah, very enthusiastic. And when Beard asked him when, Alex replied, quote, when I was killing Kim. Gomez also entered the room at this point. Alex declined an attorney, and at 8:12 p.m., Alex then spent the next 3 hours confessing. He went into great detail how all the Wilsons were murdered, and of course, the police recording everything on tape. Duh. Now, apparently, police did not need to obtain parental consent because Alex was, giving this confession, of his own free will. He was being forthcoming with it. I don't know if the law has changed in Washington since then, but that was the case back here. Alex told detectives that Friday night, while he and David were hanging out at David's house, while David was in the bathroom, he went into David's address book and got Kimberly's pager number. He then paged her, and within minutes, Kimberly had called him back. She was known to answer pages within several minutes. He said when Kimberly called him back, he persuaded her to meet him at the Chevron station that was near his home. Kimberly said that she couldn't right now because she was hanging out with Sky, but that they could meet up later. So knowing that Alex and Kimberly were not close at all, Thompson asked Alex why he had even called her. And Alex responded, quote, "Nothing in particular. I was bored." He said that he was pretty sure that she was calling from her parents' home. And this is when I'm going to read quite a bit of what Alex tells the detectives here, all right? Quote, I think she said that that's where she was calling from. We talked for a little while, and I asked her if she would meet me at the Chevron I was at in Bellevue. I just wanted to talk to her. We went over to the Woodridge Water Park. It's where I used to hang out and just talk to friends. I've lived there for a while, till I left home, but it was, maybe 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4, maybe from 6th grade until 6 or 7 months ago. We, her, David, and I, had been there several times before, just walk around and talk. I wanted to go there. It was just a familiar place. We could sit around and talk and walk around and talk. We walked around on the trails. Just talked, just like stuff that we had been doing. She told me about her stay at Job Corps, what she did there, just small talk. I don't remember us arguing. I don't remember starting to do it. I remember realizing I was strangling her with a rope. It was white, kind of looked like a rope you'd have in a sailboat. It was really tough. I don't think it was made out of cloth. I think it was like nylon or something. It wasn't like it was good quality, I don't think. I don't remember why I had left it in there, what I had used it for before, and I can tell you it wasn't for strangling somebody. I don't remember starting to do it. I don't think there was a reason. I realized she was on the ground and I was strangling her, and there's on the front of the park, there's an entrance to the far left that's a trail straight up, and then it splits off in like a T, and we had walked to the right of the T. I think that's where it happened. When I realized I was strangling her, I remember seeing her face turn blue, and I couldn't stop. I don't know why. I felt angry, but I don't know why. Kim was lying on the ground, pinned underneath me. She was face down. I had one knee on her shoulder. I didn't know if she was dead or not, and I didn't want her coming out of unconsciousness and running to the police. I tied it real tight around her neck, just like an overhand knot. I dragged her behind some bushes and left her there. And then I used my shoe, and then I just scratched out the marks I made, because I could see them even in the dark, because they were just deep rivets where her shoes... There were rivets where her shoes had dragged, probably about 30 feet, maybe more. I'm really bad at judging distances. I took her wallet and her cigarettes. I took her glasses. I thought that maybe, since she was at home, that her parents might know who she was out with. So I took her car, drove it to her house. No. I took a car and I sat in it for a while, and I drove over to her house and sat in it, because I waited until later at night. Because it was probably... It must have been a couple of hours between going into the house and leaving Kim. At least an hour. I didn't park in the driveway and sit there. I parked up the street and sat. I wasn't watching the house, but I knew where it was, and I drove into the driveway. I think I parked on the right side of the driveway. I just walked in. I was so scared that her parents knew, but they would know who she was out with last. She might have told them. Now, as you can kind of ascertain from what we just read, it said Alex spoke very slowly, methodically, stammering, repeating himself a lot, as if he was trying to decide, what to say at that moment. The book described his speech as stilted, often repeating words. His voice was said to have gone from, glum, unemotional, to just, unfeeling, to excited, even flippant. And then there were other times where he just started kind of, rambling on and on. There was a little bit in that of the part of his confession that I just read to you. And, the detectives were wondering, especially when he started rambling, getting excited, talking faster, it seemed like Alex was, dying to tell someone, what had happened. And let's read more of Alex's confession. I was wearing a pair of sweatpants, black. I was wearing a black t-shirt, and there was a black sweater over on top of it. Something was written on it. I turned it inside out, I think. I was wearing my trench coat, black. I was wearing a pair of boots. I don't remember what kind they are. I think they're called Rugged Outback. I bought them at Payless Shoes. I had my knife on me. It's a 5-inch fixed blade. It has a knuckle duster on it. That means that it has finger holes, and it has It's like brass knuckles type of thing. I went through the front door. It was unlocked. There were no lights on, none that I could see. Just saw there was a room, there was stairs. To the right of the stairs, there was a hallway and then a room. Then to the right, there was like another room. I think to the left, there was like a door, probably to the garage. I went to the right. I went up the flight of stairs. It was like the TV room. All the lights were off. I took a VCR and a CD changer. I came back later and got it. And then I went up the next flight of stairs. I turned to the right and walked a couple of steps, and the dog started barking. There were no lights on. It sounded like it was in the bedroom. I went downstairs because I got really scared. I heard a man get up out of bed, tell the dog to shut up. I kept going down. I went down the next flight of stairs, and I went into a door. It was on the right at the bottom of the stairs. I went into like a smaller room. I don't remember what was in it. Then I went to the garage door in the side, all the way in. I think the light was on. The dog stopped barking, and I guess the guy went back to bed. I assumed he did, because I didn't hear any walking around upstairs or anything. I saw a baseball bat in the corner. It was metal. It was like blue and silver. I went back upstairs. Yeah, I went upstairs, up the other stairs, turned right, and I walked into the bedroom. The dog started barking. I hit the woman on the right side of the bed with the baseball bat. And that's when Thompson asked him where the woman was. And he said on the right side of the bed, laying down. Thompson asked, like, was she sleeping or was she just lying down? Alex said that she was probably sleeping and, confirmed that, yeah, so she didn't wake up. Alex is like, yeah, I don't think so. So Thompson's like, okay, just to get it clear now, did you go to the right side of the bed or the left side of the bed? And Alex confirmed that he went to the right side. And you did what? I hit the woman with the baseball bat several times. And where? On the head. And then Thompson asked, what happened? And then Alex said the man got up. So at that point, they took a little break. Alex was getting a little tired. And when they came back, Thompson, again, was peppering Alex with questions. And he was specifically trying to get precise, exact details out of Alex to really confirm that he had, in fact, been there that night. So when they got back from the break, Thompson, restarted the tape and they started the interrogation again. And Thompson asked Alex where they were. And that's where Alex responded, quote, I just hit the woman with the baseball bat. You hit the woman with the baseball bat. Do you know who that woman was? I assume it was Kim's mom. Okay, but as we back up, I think you said that you didn't at the time know that it was a woman? And Alex said that the lights were off, but it was the person on which side of the bed? The right side. Okay, then what happened? You said that a man got up and started screaming. The man on the right side of the bed, or left side of the bed, the left side of the bed, he got up. He started yelling, like, what's going on? And I dropped the bat and went over to him. I took out my knife and I stabbed him several times, upper region of his body. I think I was trying to aim for his face. He took a swing at me. He was wearing a t-shirt and he wasn't wearing any pants. I found that out after I'd gone back to the room and turned the light on. I stumbled backwards and I went and got the bat. And when I turned around, he had gone halfway down the bed, down to the foot of the bed, and he was kneeling down. And I went up to him and I just kept hitting him with the bat till he fell to the floor. He was probably bleeding. I walked out of the room. The hallway light turned on. Julia came out of her room at the end of the hall. I think she's probably 17 or 18. And I started coming towards her and she fell to the floor and started crying. She was really scared. She might have recognized me from school a while back. I dropped the bat a couple of feet from her and pulled the knife out of my pocket, kneeled down and started stabbing her in the upper chest, neck. She had her arms over her face, was fending me off. She was crying. I told her I was sorry. I was sorry that I was killing her. I dropped the knife, I picked up the bat, and I started hitting her with it, and I stopped hitting her for a second because I was getting tired, and she grabbed the piece of closet organizer, I guess, and held it over her. She was still alive, and I picked up the bat and I started hitting that, trying to get it away from her, and just grabbed it and pulled it away from her and started hitting her in the face with it till she stopped moving. I stabbed at her maybe 7 or 8 times, but most of them I didn't actually stab anything. It was her arms were in front of her and she kept hitting my arms. I know I have a cut on my leg that I didn't have the night before. I'll have to take my pants off. It looks like a scratch from a fingernail. The light was off in the room. It was on in the hallway. I dropped the bat, picked up the knife. There was a light switch. I dropped the bat and I picked up the knife and I went back in the parents' room and turned the light on, saw the guy laying there, and the woman was still in bed. Blood was all over her and she was gurgling. I thought she was still alive. I didn't want her to suffer, so I stabbed her several times in the face and neck and in the head, because her head was sideways, I think pointing towards the window. Yeah, I think so. And I put the knife in my pocket. Then I went over to the guy, and I had been wearing a piece of cloth over my hair so that if somebody saw me enter the house, they wouldn't be able to see what kind of hair I was wearing. It was a shirt, I think. It had been cut out. I had done something with it, like a piece of a shirt that was on top of my head, like covering up my hair, so if somebody saw me from the back walk into the house, they wouldn't see what kind of hair I had. So I went over to the guy and I just realized I had lost that thing that was on my head and I thought it was underneath him. So I grabbed his arm and I hauled him up off the ground and set him behind where he had sat, closer to the window. And I looked around. for it and I couldn't find it. I eventually came to the conclusion that the dog took it and ran. It was just black, like you just cut the front off of a black shirt. I think it still had the arms on it, the arm sleeves. Couldn't find it. And I didn't find it. And I scrounged around this pair of pants and I found his wallet and I took his wallet. There was like $3 in it. Then I walked back into Julia's room because I thought maybe I dropped it there, and I looked down and she was just staring up, so I closed her eyelids. And then I pulled her further into her room. I think I pushed her. I think I grabbed one of her legs and just pushed her over. I was looking for the shirt that I dropped. I didn't find it. I went downstairs into the living room and I took the VCR. I cut the cables to the VCR with the knife, took the CD changer. I haven't looked at it since. It's at my house. I'll draw you a diagram later to see if you can get it. Kim's wallet would have been in the coat that I threw away. Kim's glasses in the coat. I went out the front door. I took the telephone. It was downstairs in the first room in the house when you walk in the front door on the right. I took the CD changer, the VCR, and the phone into the out into the driveway. I put them in the passenger seat of the car I had driven over there, and I guess I went home. I had the bat with me, and the knife was still in my pocket. I went home. I put the electronic devices in the back room and covered them up with a coat. I went in through the downstairs door. It was, I don't know. I didn't look at the clock. I only spent about half an hour in the house, I guess it was. It was probably after midnight. I remember taking the keys, but I don't remember I had to have thrown them away because I don't have them anymore, but I don't know where I threw them. I walked home, I walked up the street, uphill, and I kept going till I got to this one road that keep going up that street as far as it'll go until you'd have to make a left. And at that intersection, you look right across and there's Norwood Park, Norwood Pool. And I made a right there, down 3 streets to a dead-end street. I crossed the freeway. It must have been really late at night because there was like no cars. I just jumped over the fence and walked across the street and I went down into the woods. It's like blueberry fields. I'm not really sure what it's called, but I've been there before a bunch of times. That's where me and a bunch of my friends used to play Kanambota. It's you make fake swords out of PVC pipe, wrap it in padding and hold it together with duct tape, and you play sword fight. I went through there, and that ends you up on Bellevue Way, and I walked down Bellevue Way to my house. The wallets were gone because I didn't have the coat with me. I didn't have the knife or the bat. When I got home, I didn't have anything. I just went to bed. I don't remember driving back. As I remember putting the stuff in the dumpster. It's like a dream you had where it's like everything is really close up. All I remember seeing was the dumpster and putting the stuff in. I think it was a parking lot. I remember there being straight white lines. I'd go down Bellevue Way onto the freeway, then left at the light at the Victoria exit, and I woke up and I remember thinking it was really, really bad dream, and probably around noon or 1. There probably wouldn't have been anybody there. Ian spent the night, McDougal, probably in Bob's room. Either that or on the couch upstairs. I don't know. I didn't see him. Bob would have let him in. It's not really a bedroom. It's just a back room. It just has like junk and it's right off of the laundry room. Yeah, so yeah, that was quite a bit that I read from the book because I really, I was reading this confession and it's, again, I like to get it straight from the horse's mouth. Like, this is what he confessed to. It's so clear, right, that he's trying to, make it up as he goes with his stammering and stuttering and then rambling on about unimportant details. So after Alex was done with all that, then detectives asked him, okay, so, you've confessed, that's great. We know that you did not do this alone, so you need to name your accomplice. But Alex maintained that he had been alone. And that's when Thompson asked, quote, "Is there a reason you lied to me about that?" And Alex responded, quote, "Maybe I was protecting somebody." Thompson kept pressing, but Alex would not name David. Quote, "I can't. It's just, I can't. I mean, I can fuck up my life as much as I want, but I can't. It may be my humbleness and nobleness is all I have left. I'm sorry, I can't." They then pressed Alex for more details of the murders, just to make absolute certain that Alex was indeed there, right? Alex then went on to what he thought of Kimberly. Quote, "She wasn't a very nice person. I thought she was selfish. I just heard she was back in town and I had nothing else to do." They then asked Alex about David and where David had been that Friday evening. Quote, "I think Dave was at home. I think he had gone home and probably went to bed. I don't know where Joe was. I think we took him home a while before that. I'll tell you this though, you're cops, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever had to shoot someone before on duty, but never kill a person. It will tear you apart real good. It really will." They then, again, tried pressing Alex pushing him to implicate David, even telling Alex that David was in the other interrogation room at that moment, putting all the blame on Alex. But Alex just responded with, quote, if Dave's in the other room ratting me out, if David was in the other room saying that I shot 50 people in Oregon last week, it wouldn't matter, because he's the only person I've ever liked. Sometimes your friends are more important. And when Thompson asked Alex, well, are they more important than your life? Alex responded with, quote, yeah, if you say I have the choice of getting the death penalty or ratting out David for doing something, I'll take death. So wanting to keep Alex talking and getting more details, trying to build a case, right, as much as possible, Thompson pressed for more intimate details of how Alex had moved Kimberly's body off the trail. I'm wondering if maybe he was hoping, like, that would make him slip up with David's name or something, because maybe he didn't think just Alex could move Kimberly's body. But yeah, this is what Alex responded with. Quote, by her arms, her wrists, she was face up. This is where I'm going to have to go into. I can't say the person who helped me, but we carried her. She didn't touch the ground at all. And when Gomez asked where he put her, he responded, quote, behind, going up in the front of the park on the far left-hand side, there's a path straight up, and it forks into a T, one straight ahead and one to the right. Go a little bit to the right, like maybe, I don't know, 5 feet or so. That's where the thick, like, little pine bushes start. That's where she was left. The other person kicked her several times during the strangling. I have thought about it, and there's really no way for me to give you the answers that you really need without betraying the people who trust me. Okay, I can clarify a little more into a little less obscurity. There really was no motive as you really define. There was no, like, killing jealous or killing because they're going out with another guy or something, or killing because they're going out with another girl. And I told you about that, right? The whole thing with Sarah and Kim going out. I don't know that much. I know they went out at one time, and Michael had stole Sarah away from Kim, and Kim was pretty upset with that, and all three of them pretty much lost contact soon after that, and really never talked to each other again. I was kind of shocked. I was going out with Sarah when I found out, and I had no idea she was bi. It really didn't matter to me. I cared about her a great deal. I'm not a homophobic. I actually have several gay friends. It wasn't, I mean, yeah, it's like the jealousy thing. It wasn't a real motive. It was, I guess the motive would have been just like I told you off the tape when I left the room. It was just getting into a lifestyle that was too stagnant and needed to change. A huge rock in a puddle. Beard then wanted clarification from Alex that, like, there was no motive. Quote, so what you're saying is there was no motive. What I understand you to say is there was no motive personal to Kim particularly, but there was a motive to commit a murder. And Alex said yes. Beard then asked him if murder would change him and his accomplices' lives for the better. And Alex responded with, quote, not necessarily mine. In fact, it was probably figured it to be even worse. I mean, killing somebody killing somebody never really ends up with something good. And there's just that opportunity to experience something truly phenomenal. There really didn't, I mean, Kim was pretty. She was unplanned. It was kind of a spur of the moment kind of thing. It wasn't, and that's when Detective Thompson, like, cut him off, wanting to know how long he'd actually been planning to commit a murder. And Alex responded, quote, probably years, a long time. Death in itself has always really fascinated me, and I've always been kind of interested in that. I never really contemplated, like, murder until a little while ago. It was like there was no person that I met that made me think about it. It was just like a change on my own. That was pretty much it right there. It wasn't premeditated murder. I've always thought about this a lot after I've done it. Shooting a gun is a lot different than strangling somebody to death, because you can shoot somebody in the head from 50 feet away and walk away and barely see a thing, not feel anything, not hear it, not smell it. It's more profoundly disturbing, I would think, actually killing somebody with, like, a handheld weapon that's like you have to actually do work rather than pull a trigger. I mean, I don't know how people, like, I don't know, you read stuff, like, about, like, the old Italian mafia, how they could, like, strangle somebody to death, like, strangle, like, 5 or 6 people in a week and still live with yourself. I mean, I could see, like, the person in a gang shooting somebody and not really feeling remorse about it, but being, like, excited and stuff. That's because it's like you get to tell all your friends you shot somebody and you really don't feel, and you weren't close to the person when they died. When I killed those people, I thought to myself, it's just a job. It's just something that you have to do. That's a bad word, because I didn't have to do it, but I thought to myself, it's just a job. Just like jackhammering out a chunk of concrete. You don't want to do it, but you do it anyway because it's there. And whenever you do it, whenever I did it, at least, I pretty much acted just like a machine. I didn't feel anything. I just did it, waited until I was sure the person was dead, and moved on. Directly afterwards, you hit, like, a wall of your own self-consciousness, of humanity, and you realize you've just killed somebody, and you can smell the fact that the smell is definitely the worst thing. Your sight, you can disbelieve what your eyes see a lot better than you can anything else. The sound of a bat hitting a human being's skull will forever haunt you. I've heard stuff in my sleep that sound, and I've woken up to it, and it's been my alarm clock. The smell is by far the worst, though. Human beings generally will. A scent is one of the most powerful forms of you can smell the smell of chocolate chip cookies, and think back for years to as my mom said, I mean, if she smelled chocolate chip cookies cooking in the oven, she thought back 30 years to when her grandmother was making chocolate chip cookies in Pittsburgh. But I can't even imagine when you guys got there. The smell was so overwhelming in the house. It was just horrible. And every now and then it will just come back to me, and I'll remember what it smelled like. Then I remember what I did and really regret it. The human skull is a lot harder than I ever imagined it would be. And when he was informed that he had, in fact, cracked the Wilson skulls, Alex said that he was surprised by that. Quote, they were? But I was expecting something along the lines of hitting a couple of times, weakening it, and then it just caving in, and it doesn't. It stays pretty much in that form. And then Gomez then asked Alex how it felt to plunge a knife into a human body. And Alex replied, quote, yeah, I was just about to get to that. That's an even worse feeling. A knife will go right through your temple with no problem at all. When you stab somebody, I'll use a metaphor of waterproofing, just because that's the best way I can possibly describe it. Whenever you dig a hole, that's like there's a bunch of water around the dirt, and you dig a hole, and then the water just fills up from the bottom up. That's pretty much what happens. I mean, I stabbed that woman in the neck, and when I pulled the knife out, you could see a hole for a second, and then it filled up with blood. I'm sure you've probably had a real special woman in your life. Then it's maybe she dumps you to go out with some other guy, and you just think to yourself, God, I really want to kill that bastard. But there's not one goddamn thing on this earth that could ever make me kill a person. There is nothing. But even still, Alex still refused to name his accomplice. Quote, I guess what you're asking me to do is rationalize which is better, to fuck over an entire family, or fuck over one person, or fuck over your friend. And then Gomez tried applying more pressure. Quote, that friend you're so interested in protecting. But that's when Alex interrupted and said, quote, is going to be nothing in a moment. It's nothing right now. If you guys have the other person in the room, in another room, doing the same thing to him right now, why does it matter that I tell you? Do you just want to see me say it and do the right thing? I feel, down to my gut, logically thinking, truthful as anything, that if I say his name, it's the wrong thing to do. No matter how many people are suffering, no matter how many more years I'll be in a goddamn penitentiary, if I totally admit the part about having a partner, what else is going to happen to me than if I don't? So what you guys are basically saying is that I'm just going to have to live with the fact that I didn't do the right. And that's when Gomez cut Alex off and asked oh, would it be easier to write his name? But Alex still refused, and they tried getting him to name David some more, but he just wouldn't, and that was practically the end of his confession and interrogation. But towards the end, as they were all right, he's not gonna name his accomplice, Alex did give them a shred of hope that maybe one day he would confess. Quote, all right, you better give me your phone number, because one day you're gonna get a call from me, and I'm gonna tell you. I promise you that. And I'm not sure when, but at some point, Alex did admit that he was in Marcia's stepfather's black pickup truck the night of the murders. I don't know when. That would probably be my biggest complaint with this book, is that I feel like there wasn't really concise dates or information really put in there. It was just sort of added there, oh yeah, he added this in his interrogation. So meanwhile, all right, as Alex is spilling his guts, Prosecutor Eakes and Detective Johnson were trying to interrogate David. However, he wasn't saying anything. They confronted him about his now shattered alibi about playing Nintendo with Alex, and then David admitted that he was really just driving around in Marcia's stepfather's pickup truck all night. That's really what he was doing. They asked him why he had lied, and then David said, quote, to protect Alex. He denied being involved in the murders in any way, shape, or form, and grew very frustrated and angry when detectives just kept pressing him and didn't believe him. David then said that he knew Alex had been planning the murders for a while, and that the only connection Alex even had to Kimberly was the fact that he knew her. Detectives did get David to admit that he was at the park that Friday night, but that was right before he snapped and said, look, I didn't do it. Both Eakes and Johnson attempted to interrogate David one-on-one, each of them, hoping maybe, that would get him to crack, but that didn't work. And in fact, David was extra creepy with Prosecutor Eakes when they were doing their one-on-one interrogation. I guess when she shifted in her seat, David leaned over, put his hand on her knee, and said casually, how are you doing with all this? Finally, after conferring with Gomez and Beard, who were taking a break with Alex at that point, the detectives and prosecutor came up with a new strategy. Try to get David to break. So, they were gonna plan on storming into the interrogation room and just sort of like going at David with everything, you know, like, oh, I know you did it, you know, kind of like implying that kind of pressure. And as they were concocting that plan, Detective Johnson was in his one-on-one interview with David. So he's in the middle of his one-on-one interview with David. And that's when Gomez stormed in and shouted, quote, "You're a murderer. You killed those people." Beard was right behind him, and he added, "You're a lucky motherfucker. You're not 18 or you would have faced the death penalty. You did it, and we'll prove you did it." Beard then told David that he could go home at any time. Now, this tactic worked in getting David very emotional and angry, but that's about it. Rather than spill his guts out of fear or whatever, David clammed up and demanded a lawyer. Detective Johnson would later say that he was extremely pissed off at what Gomez and Beard did because he felt he had finally started getting a rapport with David, and he felt sure he could have gotten him to confess. It is just not a day without animal hair in my makeup. After invoking his right to an attorney, David decided to leave, and Detective Johnson gave him a ride home. When David got home, which was around 10 p.m., he called up Alex Sr. and Mary Beth to inform them that their son was currently in jail. He didn't tell them what for, just that Alex was locked up. And then shortly after, the police called them and informed them what they were holding Alex on. And rather than insist there was a mix-up, that they had to have had the wrong person, instead, the Baranyis just stayed up all night drinking coffee, stressing out and worrying about how this was going to affect them. How this was going to affect their reputation and how embarrassing this was. That was all that primarily concerned them all night. They did not care about Alex. They wouldn't even go down to the police station until that Saturday. And Alex's mother was contacted the morning he was arrested, so that Friday morning. And on this same Friday, January 10th, Alex had his very first court appearance. And there, he was held without bond, remanded to a juvenile detention center by King County pro-term judge Norman Quinn. King County prosecutor spokesman Dan Donahue told the press, quote, "We are looking at charging him as an adult, citing a 1994 law that allows charges in extraordinary cases to be filed in adult court if the suspect is 16 or 17. King County prosecutor Norm Malang updated the press on what they had discovered, like what Alex had said thus far. Quote, "The evidence suggests that the murders were committed for the sheer experience of killing." Malang announced that he was going to request a $10 million bail for Alex. After he was arrested, of course, the police searched the room that he rented at the Boyd's, duh. They took some brown work shoes from Alex's room to see if they could match the footprints that they found at the home. Not the shoe print that was on the back of Bill's back, but remember those other footprints that they found? Of course, wasn't a match. They also found a bloody shoelace in Alex's trash can, and when they tested the blood, it ended up being Bill's. In a storage room down the hall from the room that Alex rented, under a coat and covered with lots of dried blood, police found a telephone, a CD player, and a VCR. They all, of course, belonged to the Wilsons. There were fingerprints smeared in blood on the VCR. The blood ended up being Bill's, and the fingerprints ended up being Alex's. They would end up never finding the boots Alex wore that night. It is believed that he disposed of them after the fact. And upon further investigating, further interviewing neighbors of David and Alex, police were able to find at least 3 neighbors who would testify that they saw Alex and David leaving the Boyd house that Friday night. So also this same Friday, police decided to interview Sarah Lamp. And Sarah, being such a Rhodes Scholar, because she's so smart, decided to drop acid before her interview. Marcia ended up driving her to the police interview and did inform police that Sarah was totally tripping on acid. Yeah, real smart one. You can guess how Sarah's interrogation went, right? Her answers were all over the place. She couldn't even pinpoint an alibi for herself that Friday night, for she was asleep, then she was at work, and then she was up all night talking to her roommate. Police also noticed that she happened to be wearing a pair of black combat boots, but they did not confiscate them. All they did was take pictures of them. All in all, Sarah's interview and answers were so bad, and she did so poorly, that police were considering her a third suspect. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah, that's why you don't drop acid before you go talk to police. Of course, also, I mean, are we shocked? Like, who sits there and talks about robbing and killing people they know, you know? So clearly she's not the sharpest tool in the shed. It was super clear to the police that she knew more than what she was telling them, and it was very clear that she was trying to protect Alex and David. So when Alex's piece of shit sperm donor and stepmother decided to get off their ass and go down to the police station, Detective Gomez was the one who would end up meeting them. Gomez described his little interview with the Baranyis as them being primarily more concerned about themselves and their reputation and how this was going to look than, you know, about Alex. Gomez described it as if, like, Alex Sr. was completely detached from his son. They never once asked how Alex was doing, insisting that, like, there must be some mistake, demanding what evidence the police had, threatening to get Alex a lawyer. They did none of that. The Baranyis were more concerned about themselves. In fact, they actually told Gomez that they were scared they were going to be targeted next because they knew Alex couldn't kill 4 people on his own. Alex Sr. said, quote, "You know, I love him, but I feel that Kevin is capable. He has the anger. My feeling is that he couldn't have taken out 4 people by himself." He then went on to say, quote, "He was so abusive to us. He'd been threatening to leave our home. I kept saying, we can't control him." Yeah, this guy, piece of shit father, has always been a piece of shit father. And now he's saying, well, he abused us. Bitch, get the hell out of here. Like, what a pathetic human being. Gomez was pretty grossed out with the Baranyis when they were done. Like, he was thoroughly disgusted, and like he couldn't believe their attitude. He would later say about Alex Sr., quote, that was bullshit. How can you love your son and then turn around and say he's a murderer?" On Saturday, January 11th, David, who, remember, is free and clear, is just walking around, living his life, went to his parents' house for his father's birthday. His mom wanted all the boys to be together, and so that's where he was. While he was there, David asked Mike to cut his hair. And so the next day, the Denny's Club were meeting back up again. They had been pretty shook up that someone who was in their group had been murdered. And one of the girls, named Corby, saw David in the parking lot of the Denny's. Like, remember, David and Alex had dropped out of the Denny's Club scene. So, you know, their friends hadn't really seen him in a while. And when Corby looked over and saw David and his cut hair, she was shocked. She was so surprised that he would cut his shoulder-length blonde hair. And he also had dyed it black. Remember, we said this in part 1. David really prided himself on his looks. He liked being a pretty boy, and she was shocked that he would, like, hack off his hair and dye it black. So when Corby, approached him and, asked David, like, hey, do you know what's going on? Of course, referring to Kim and, like, what had happened. David went out of his way to be like, I don't know anything, don't talk to me, whatever. I don't know anything, I didn't see anything, whatever. So for the next 4 days after Alex was arrested, David just continued living his life, walking around, like, nothing was amiss, nothing was wrong. But then finally, on Monday, January 13th, police would finally get a break that would allow them to arrest David. So police had found a piece of rope in the bed of Marcia's stepfather's black pickup truck. And remember, David already admitted that he was driving around in that truck the night of the murders. Well, that Monday, the forensic experts got their results in, and that piece of rope matched the piece of rope that was found around Kimberly's neck. And this was enough for police to then issue an arrest warrant for David. So the next day, on Tuesday, January 14th, the police had Officer Molly McBride contact Marcia. She had been in contact with her, and she informed Marcia that they're going to need some sort of work order on her VW Rabbit. And I wasn't quite sure because the book did not elaborate. I'm guessing maybe to, like, prove it was in the shop or something. But yeah, Molly McBride was like, hey, can you come down and, like, drop off that work order paperwork? And, Marcia was like, yeah, sure. And detectives assumed that if Marcia came down to the police station, David would be with her. And when she pulled up, they were right. He was with her. So as the police were holding their press conference to update the press on everything around 4:30 p.m., Marcia went inside to drop off her paperwork while David stayed behind in the car. And that was when detectives arrested him right then and there on the spot. But I guess unbeknownst to them at that time, earlier that day, David had secured a lawyer. So they were not able to interrogate him, like, at all. Quote, when we arrested him today, he invoked his rights. Any further contact we have will come through his attorney. It appears we have the two people who committed these murders. And this was according to Lieutenant Ferguson, who was updating the press on the second arrest of David. And David was then booked into the King County Youth Center. Now, at first, David's name was not released to the public, but the interim police chief, Garni Arcand, said of the second arrest, quote, at this time, we think we have the two primary participants who committed these crimes, and with these two persons in custody, our community, especially the Woodridge area, will sleep better tonight. And after news and everything hit the papers and the press and all that, remember Dawn Kinchy from part 1? She was a girl that Alex had threatened to kill and beat up. Her mother, Casey Kinchy, alerted the press to, Dawn's experience with Alex all the way back then. And she said nothing was done. Quote, had they done something then, perhaps those people would still be alive. Bob Boyd told the press that he himself had never seen any acts of violence from Alex, although, quote, he does have a temper. He also told the press that Alex did collect swords and that police did confiscate, that and some other stuff from Alex's room. Now, after David was arrested, right, they of course took the boots he was wearing. And though to the naked eye they looked clean, when forensic experts, put it under microscope and really, looked at it, they ended up finding microscopic specks of blood. Not only that, they also contained pieces of brain matter. Again, they were microscopic. You couldn't see them. The blood and brain matter was ultimately determined to belong to Bill and Julia. And due to the shape, volume, and consistency and the pattern of the blood and brain matter, it was determined that those boots would have had to have been in very, very close proximity to Bill and Julia to get those blood and brain matter on them, as they were being killed too. So on the same day David was arrested, Alex was officially charged as an adult. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, and if convicted, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And that's without the possibility of parole. By that time, the Supreme Court had ruled that it was unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile to death. So yeah, that's why the prosecution was instead going to go with life without parole. David had his first court appearance the next day, Wednesday, January 15th, but he did not physically show up in court. His court-appointed attorney, Daryl Marshall, said he wanted to avoid reporters. And he was also objecting to charging David as an adult. Quote, it should be a case-by-case basis. The fact that he is 17, we don't know what his mental capacity is. He could have the mind of a 13-year-old. Who knows? And I was a little confused because, again, this was one of the complaints of the book that I have. Not a lot of precise detail. So they said in the book that he had secured an attorney earlier that day, but at his first court appearance, it was a court-appointed attorney. So I'm not too sure. Maybe that stuff, I don't know, it takes a while. I'm happy to say that I don't have experience in the criminal justice system, Superior Court Judge Charles V. Johnson found that there was more than enough evidence to keep David behind bars. And by Friday, January 17th, both boys had officially been charged as adults, and both their bails had been set at $10 million each. Although the book said that each of their bail was $5 million, but in newspaper articles, they reported that it was $10 million each. So that same day, Alex officially pled not guilty, and prosecutors announced at his arraignment that they planned to have one trial for both boys. And at this point in time, the trial was slated for October, but of course it would end up being delayed. David's arraignment was held on Wednesday, January 22nd, where he too pled not guilty. In March, Judge Ricardo Martinez ordered that David and Alex had to submit blood and hair samples. I don't know if Alex's attorney was trying to fight it, but I know David's attorney at that time was trying to fight him producing those samples. In May, the Wilsons' neighbors planted a cherry tree at the entrance to the neighborhood in honor of the Wilson family. And in July, both Alex and David's attorneys were fighting to have their clients tried separately. And they also wanted a change of venue outside of King County. Quote, I am asking for a separate trial to make sure my clients get a fair trial. And this was according to David's new attorneys, Michael Coker and Stephen Ila. I'm going to go with Isla. But they said there had already been, quote, a ton of publicity around the case, and that there was just no way that their client would get a fair trial in King County. Alex's attorneys were Kathy Lynn and Mark Flora. And like I just stated, yeah, each team was fighting to get David and Alex their own individual trials. So a hearing was scheduled for September to address this issue before Superior Court Judge Bobby Bridge. In September, Alex's 3-hour taped confession was released to the press, and this was after Coker had actually requested that be done. And on September 26th, the hearing was held to determine if they would each have their own trial or be tried together. Coker argued that Alex's confession contained graphic details, and these details and him confessing to the murder would prejudice the jury against his client. He also pointed out that his client had never confessed to anything. He reiterated to Judge Bridge that David's name was only brought up when police and detectives brought it up, and even then, Alex still, didn't implicate David. And he also said that there was a law that forbade the confession of one defendant to be used against another defendant who hasn't confessed in a joint trial. Like, basically saying is like, we're gonna have a joint trial, you can't do this because it's against the law. Senior Deputy Prosecutor Eakes argued that Alex's confession could easily be edited to omit any mention of David or an accomplice. And she stated that even if both boys were to be tried separately, the prosecution was still gonna go with the stance that the boys had committed it together. She also said that prosecutors had other evidence that pointed to David's guilt, even without Alex's confession, citing that blood and brain matter that was found on David's boots. On Friday, October 3rd, Judge Bridge ruled in the prosecution's favor, ruling that Alex's confession would not automatically prejudice the jury. She said Alex's statement makes, quote, no affirmative, clear assertion of co-defendant Anderson's participation in the crimes charged. To the contrary, the only suggestion that co-defendant Anderson may be an accomplice to the crimes is made by law enforcement personnel during the interrogation, and defendant Baranyi never concurs with their suggestions. She also delayed the trial at this time until the following May. But, so we can guess, it would get delayed even further. So a year after the killings, the papers did some interviews with neighbors and friends of the Wilsons just to kind of reflect on, it'd been a year since that gruesome murder and, how people were handling it and stuff. Skye was one of those interviewed, and she said a year after the murder that thoughts about it are, quote, easier to control, but not any less painful. I haven't had a friend like Kim to talk to laugh with. That's what this year has missed. When you lose somebody like that, it's an enormous shock. You don't ever really get over it. You ignore it for the most part until someone mentions it or something reminds you. So we'll jump forward in time in April of 1998. All right, trials are coming up. We got pre-trial motions, all that stuff is going on, right? So it's April 1998, and Alex's defense was requesting that he be evaluated because they were thinking about coming at it with a diminished mental capacity defense. And we have talked about this before. If you remember, a diminished mental capacity defense means that you're not saying your defendant didn't do the crime, but they are so mentally impaired that they literally cannot form the, intent to commit the crime. You know what I'm saying? That's what Alex's lawyers, Lynn and Flora, were gonna try to go for. So they wanted to have Alex evaluated. Alex was then sent to a psychologist for an examination. In July, psychologist Dr. Karen Bronk-Fromming from San Diego, California, interviewed Alex for a total of 25 hours over the course of 6 sessions. And she said Alex's mental state is, quote, clearly impaired, and, quote, his internal thinking is occupied by fantasy or racing thoughts. She said Alex had bipolar disorder, and said Alex, quote, is competent in the broadest sense, but his mental state is clearly impaired. But when her report was submitted to the courts, the prosecution, had a lot of beef with Dr. Fromming's report. They said her findings were at times confusing and contradictory, and they maintained that her findings would not meet the criteria for a diminished mental capacity defense. In that same month, July, one of several pretrial motions was held, and it was one of several pretrial motions that had been brought forth by Coker. Remember earlier when we said the judge said that Alex and David had to submit, hair and blood samples? Well, Coker was trying to push back on that. They tried to argue that David having to submit these samples was an invasion of his privacy, but, Judge Bridge denied this, saying, are you kidding me? These requests are beyond reasonable. And David was then forced to submit blood, hair, and writing samples to police. Coker then filed another pretrial motion hearing requesting a change of venue outside of King County. He was arguing that the case had received substantial media coverage, and there was no way they'd be able to find a jury who wasn't prejudiced, or had heard about the case. case. But Judge Bridge again denied his motion, arguing that King County was so large that they were not going to have a problem finding jurors who had never heard of the case. During the same month of July, Judge Bridge announced that she would have to step down from the Anderson-Baranyi trial because her docket was just too full. So King County Superior Court Judge Michael Spearman then took over. So after a local paper called the Eastside Journal published Dr. Fromming's report, Judge Spearman ended up sealing her report from the public, saying that he wasn't even aware that the press had gotten their hands on it until he had opened up the paper and saw it that morning, and he was outraged, and so he sealed it. He said he wanted to read it himself and be able to study findings himself, and didn't want newspapers reporting it on it and all that other stuff. So a hearing was going to be held later the same month on July 22nd, and it was going to be about Dr. Fromming's report and her findings. But we don't know what exactly happened with that because Judge Spearman issued a gag order and sealed the case from the public. But we do know by this point in time, Alex's defense team was denied a diminished mental capacity defense. So now Lynn and Flora had to come at it from a completely different angle, right? So basically, they were going to try to downplay Alex's part in the murders and pin the main thing on David. They interviewed Alex's family and friends, combed through all of his journals and musings and writings, and they were definitely trying to paint that picture of a very troubled young man who got swept up with the wrong person. Coker and Isla, meanwhile, focused on proving that their client was nowhere near the murders when they happened. He had nothing to do with it. He wasn't even there. David's parents and brothers faithfully showed up to every single pretrial motion hearing he had, any other hearings that he had. They always showed up. They couldn't afford his bail, obviously, but they showed up to support him, while nobody ever showed up for Alex. In September, Coker filed another pretrial motion trying to get David tried separately from Alex, claiming that the jury would be biased against David, and it would have a whole kind of guilt by association thing, And the prosecution argued that putting the Wilsons through 2 trials was not just cruel, it was also very, very expensive. Judge Spearman ended up ruling in the prosecution's favor. However, he did say the prosecution had to scrub and edit out any mention of David or even an accomplice when they played Alex's taped confession in court. They had to edit it so it seems Alex acted completely alone. So, Thursday, October 1st, 1998, jury selection is underway for the joint trial of Alex and David, right? But as they are in the middle of picking a jury, everything had to be halted because of a Supreme Court ruling decision that had just come down. It was regarding the diminished mental capacity defense, which, remember, Alex's team wanted to use. This Supreme Court decision ended up making it easier to get. And so on October 7th, after going through the Supreme Court decision, Judge Spearman allowed Alex's defense team to now present that as a defense. And he was going to allow, because they were going to allow that, he was going to allow Dr. Fromming to testify. But because Dr. Fromming was going to testify, he ordered that Alex and David needed to have 2 separate trials now. And this was so David wouldn't be implicated in Dr. Fromming's testimony or report, which I guess in her report, it overtly puts the majority blame on David. And so of course, now that there's going to be 2 trials, the prosecution was you know what? We'll just play Alex's confession in full in court. But then Coker wanted David to be tried first because, again, he thought Alex's trial would prejudice any jury or people against his client. And Alex's team wanted to be tried second because they were now going to come at this with a whole new defense strategy, so they needed time. However, Judge Spearman pointed out that David's trial was only slated to last for a month, while Alex's trial was slated to last twice as long. A jury had already been impaneled. They were already in the middle of a jury selection, right? And there was just no sense in waiting. So Judge Spearman ruled that, no, you're going to have your 2 separate trials, but Alex will be tried first and David will be tried second. So opening statements for Alex's trial began just a week later on Monday, October 12th, 1998. Alex's mother, Patricia, did show up for the trial, along with her two brothers, Alex's uncles. The defense presented their diminished mental capacity defense, right? Saying that Alex had been swept up in the world of fantasy, LARPing, D&D, and it had blurred. He didn't know reality from this fantasy world. They said he was an angry loner child who had been practically abandoned by his parents, had no friends. That is, until he met David. They pointed to David as the main instigator, and that Alex was just merely a follower, and that Alex, did whatever David wanted because he was so desperate for companionship and friendship because he was so lonely. And because of that, he ended up becoming very loyal to David, and so loyal, committed a murder with him. They also tried to say that Alex's bipolar disorder also fed into this, mixing of reality and fantasy worlds. The prosecution, led by Eakes and Beard, argued, of course, that Alex knew very well what he was doing, when he killed Kim and the Wilsons. He did not think he was in some fantasy LARP land. He knew exactly what he was doing. And they argued that he didn't have any mental disorder, and that this was just a cold, calculated, premeditated killing by him and David. Marcia, who had broken up with David at this point, testified at Alex's trial. She spoke about how a month after his arrest, Marcia and a friend named Jeannie Kern went down to the jail to talk to Alex because they just couldn't believe it, what he had confessed to, what he was being held on. They couldn't believe it, so they wanted to talk to Alex. Marcia testified how Alex not only readily admitted to what he had done, at times he even grew excited as he spoke about it. She testified how weirdly calm and casual Alex was as they were talking, and she said his demeanor was that of someone who was resigned to the fact that he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. He knew that that's what his life was going to be. She also said, quote, "I asked him if David had been there, and he said no, but he nodded at the same time." Ron Boyd, remember Bob's father, he testified in Alex's trial, testified to what a hard worker Alex was, how much they liked having him, what a good, honest kid he was, and how his son Bob had been enamored with both Alex and David. He spoke how he didn't really like David, though. I guess David had stayed with the Boyds at one point, but he couldn't pay rent, so they, booted him. He also said he didn't like that David's drug problems were rubbing off on his son, and he just didn't really like David. He thought he was kind of like a bad influence. Sarah Lamp also testified, although it was not easy to get her to trial. She had moved to Alaska and dropped out of high school mere months after the murders, and police had to track her down. Even when she found out what Alex and David were being charged with, that they were going to go to trial, even knowing all that, this bitch still didn't come forward to police. They had to hunt her down. They had to go to her. She tried really, really hard to protect David and Alex. She was really scared that she was going to get in trouble too, because, she had been with them in the discussions, and then it ended up happening, right? So she was scared that she was going to get in trouble. Her testimony, with her interview with police, was not very well done. She was all over the place. She contradicted herself many, many times. And all in all, her testimony was seen as being, very much a mixed bag. It was very clear that she knew more than what she was telling. It was super obvious. When Prosecutor Eakes really pressed her on the conversations that David and Alex had about, killing the Wilsons and stuff, she tried defending them. Quote, "Kim and her family weren't so much the targets, but they had 3 or 4 cars and valuables in their home. I never remember it being personal or vindictive, but since they never leave, you'd have to kill them. My belief is they were conversations. They were never going to happen." As if having full-blown hour-long discussions about robbing and then killing people that you intimately know is, no big deal. Okay, whatever, Sarah. So even though she had told police in sworn, signed statements that the conversations did move on to what particular weapons that they would use, like knives and bats and stuff, on the stand, she tried to say that they didn't really discuss weaponry. Maybe a lamp or some other nearby objects, but they didn't really go into detail. Eakes, of course, let her hang herself on the stand and, pointed out the inconsistencies in her statements to police versus what she was saying, there in court. And being the idiot that she is, Sarah fumbled hard. She walked in thinking that she was smarter than, the lawyers in the room. Bitch, you're some dumb teenager who dropped out of high school. You're not smarter than these people. Her whole attitude and demeanor was very teenage girl-like, and it was just so funny thinking that she's so clever, and Eakes just made her look like a dumbass on the stand. In fact, at one point, this dumb bitch, Sarah, even tried to blame Kimberly for what happened. Quote, "People were mad she was sticking her nose into other people's business." Sarah's trash. Like, I hope that she has changed for the better, you know? But, like, at this point in time, Sarah's trash. So, on October 22nd, there was a little bit of drums in the courtroom, and it had to do with Dr. Fromming's testimony. Judge Spearman told Lynn and Flora that they had to prepare for Fromming to come and testify that following Monday, but Flora insisted they needed more time, and that Fromming couldn't even come until that following Wednesday, and also complained that they already felt rushed in everything. And Judge Spearman countered, well, if that was the case, then I guess we just won't have Dr. Fromming's testimony. And it prompted this response from Flora. Quote, "We told you in plain English we were not ready. Your Honor is buying a second trial for Mr. Baranyi if you haven't done so already." Spearman immediately halted proceedings for the day, and then in his chambers, the defense, the prosecution, and him, like, hashed it out in his chambers. The compromise was to have Dr. Fromming come in that following Tuesday. On October 27th, Alex asked Judge Spearman for a new trial because he didn't agree with his lawyer's diminished mental capacity defense. He didn't want to do it from the beginning, and he just did it because they told him to. And the next day, Judge Spearman rejected his request, saying that your request, this is hindsight, man. And at this point, the prosecution had already presented and rested their case, so it was like, nah, brah, this is like hindsight, you're stuck. It was said Alex appeared really disinterested during most of his trial, often like doodling on notepads or something. He occasionally looked up when witnesses were on the stand, especially when Sarah came up. He was definitely attentive when Sarah was testifying. He looked up when the really gruesome autopsy photos were shown, commented on Eekes's clothes, and like complimented her on how much he liked it. And one day, he even complained to Flora about his picture that was in the paper, saying, quote, "Is my nose really that big?" Like, he was described as being completely detached from what was going on around him. Dr. Fromming testified to what her report stated, that she believed Alex was mentally ill, had manic depressive disorder, and was abandoned by both parents. Quote, "His memories of her, his mother, are positive. She's warm, supportive. His father, on the other hand, was one of the most hostile, demeaning people I've ever interviewed. Here we have this child who's been abandoned by the mother he idolizes. Here he's put with a male role model who put him down. When Alex Sr. remarried, it was clear to me that both of them were just as happy to have Alex out of the house." She testified to the several tests that she administered to Alex in order to assess if he had any, like, neurological disorders or something, right? Including the famous Rorschach test. Is that still a thing? Like, is that... Like, let me know. Do you guys know, like, is that still a thing? Is that, like, accurate or whatever? I'm totally curious. Oh, my hair was killing me. I had to take that off. So, Dr. Fromming talked about when she showed Alex a certain ink blot in that Rorschach test, Alex came up with a story. It was about a boy named Bill and his sister named Julia, and they were unable to get home after encountering a gnome. Now, at some point, the gnome turns Julia into a violin, and in the end, Bill, who misses his sister dearly, uses the violin to beat the gnome to death. Dr. Fromming testified that the story Alex concocted, was rife with prominent themes of depression. However, something Dr. Fromming failed to note, and that the prosecution would use against her, was the fact that Alex had named these two characters after two of the victims. Dr. Fromming spoke about another test she had administered called the MMPI, which I guess is an in-depth personality test that, administers a series of questions, and the questions and the answers are supposed to help psychologists get in the minds of criminals. The answers are then scored and put on a graph. All right. Dr. Fromming testified that Alex scored very, very high on depression, social dysfunctions, and family problems. Another category in this test is ASP, anti-social practices. And rather than saying Alex scored high in this category as well, because he did, she mistakenly testified that ASP stood for high aspirations, and that's what Alex had tested high for. And of course, the prosecution picked up on this. Another thing that Dr. Fromming did that would end up coming to bite the defense in the ass is that in all the interviews she did with Alex, she never asked him about the murders themselves. Alex had volunteered that information all by himself, including the fact that he had killed Kimberly and then went to the Wilson home and killed the family. However, this never made it into any of Dr. Fromming's notes or report. And her excuse was that by that point in time, she had stopped taking notes altogether because she wanted to maintain eye contact with Alex and keep a good rapport going. The defense asked the doctor for her assessment of Alex, and she testified that she believed Alex was so immersed in this fantasy world at the time of the murders, which he needed to escape his crappy life, that he was still deeply in this world when he murdered Kim and her family. She stated that she believed Alex was unable to premeditate the murder of Kimberly, but she wasn't sure about the Wilson family. She testified that ultimately she believed Alex was following David's lead. Quote, I think in his heart it was his reliance on this relationship and how much it meant to him, and that the other very significant part is the fantasy life that is built up around having this loyal, bonded relationship, this blood brother you would do anything for. But on cross-examination by the prosecution, her mistakes and omissions and all that came back to bite her in the ass and pretty much destroyed her entire thesis. So Beard suggested to the jury that the reason Dr. Fromming didn't take those notes when she was interviewing Alex when he admitted that he had killed them all was because that would have shown intent, which completely negates the diminished mental capacity defense, right? During one of their interviews, Alex had told her how he and David had planned to kill Kimberly when she was home for the holidays. He also recalled how he killed Kimberly, and when he was at the Wilson home, he had also told Dr. Fromming that he specifically went to look for Julia to kill her. Beard ended up shredding everything Dr. Fromming had testified to, and even got her to admit through a series of back and forth questions that Alex was well aware what he was doing when he wrapped that rope around Kimberly's neck, when he stabbed Bill, when he went to go look for Julia to kill her. He knew exactly what he was doing and where he was. Beard also pointed out Dr. Fromming's mistake about the ASP acronym and how she had misidentified it, not just during her testimony, but in her notes and report as well. She apparently had realized the mistake. I don't know if this was during or before her testimony, but she did realize this mistake at some point in time. And when Beard asked her why she never corrected herself or the defense or anything, she stated she simply forgot. And with all these mistakes, right, the prosecution was able to just completely shred and discredit anything Dr. Fromming had testified to. On Halloween, October 31st, the prosecution called their expert medical witness, Dr. Robert Wheeler. Like Dr. Fromming, he was an expert in mental health, and he administered the same tests to Alex that Dr. Fromming had. However, his findings were completely different than Dr. Fromming's. Dr. Wheeler insisted that Alex had a personality disorder marked by aggression, impulsiveness, and a lack of empathy. Dr. Wheeler testified that Alex knew what he was doing before, during, and after the murders. Quote, he was clearly weighing, reasoning, and deliberating. And he informed the jury Alex had told him, quote, I obviously knew we were going to kill them. Dr. Wheeler also concluded that when Alex was in his Slicer Thunderclap persona, he knew he wasn't this, mercenary guy. He wasn't Slicer Thunderclap. He knew that. He was just trying to be cool for his friends. That's what Dr. Wheeler testified to. Alex was convicted on November 4th, 1998 on all charges. It only took the jury about 3.5 hours of deliberations. One juror named Carl King spoke to the press about, what he thought. Quote, I think he's a neurotic, troubled young guy who had a bad upbringing. That's not really his fault, but I don't think that makes him any less guilty. I think maybe he feels remorse. Maybe he has the capacity to feel remorse, but I believe he put it at the back of his mind. And Alex was sentenced to an automatic 4 consecutive life sentences without parole on January 9th, 1999. When asked if he had anything to say, Alex, smiling, said, quote, I don't think so. But in an interview with the East Side Journal, Alex apparently had more to say. Quote, if I was the jury, I would have found me guilty too. He was described as quite upbeat and animated in the interview and said he didn't think of himself as a murderer. Quote, it's almost like the ability to kill someone is totally separate from someone's personality. It's, I don't know, maybe a messed up gene somewhere. He said he had no reason for what he did. Quote, I have consciously tried to block out as much of that situation as possible. It's a very gruesome thing, and it's not something I want to remember. I look back and think I couldn't have done it. It seems like I was a different person. The victim's family will hate me until the day I die. No begging for forgiveness would even be listened to. He also thought his police confession was kind of funny, the things that he said. Quote, that whole experience with death thing, I can't believe it said all that garbage. David's trial would begin on January 25th, 1999, just a few weeks after Alex was officially sentenced. Coker had tried again to get a change of venue, arguing the publicity was so intense. But in the end, King County, just like Judge Bridge said, King County was so large, they didn't have a problem finding a jury who hadn't heard of the Wilson murders. Now, unlike Alex, who didn't really try to, put on a persona or anything for the jury or the press or anything. David did. He tried to sell the proper young man persona, by dressing nicely, shaking his lawyer's hands, and, acting all proper and whatnot. And unlike Alex, who only had his mother and 2 uncles for support, David had his whole family and friends who came to his trial to support him. Now, David's defense team strategy was pretty bold, to say the least. Not only were they maintaining that their client was innocent, but that he wasn't even there that night. Instead, they claimed, that David had been driving around in Marcia's stepfather's black pickup truck all night, despite the fact that Marcia had told police that very little gas had been used when David returned the truck to her. But one thing the defense did have going for them, though, was the lack of physical evidence. Now, even though the blood found on David's boots was that of Bill and Julia, none of his actual shoe prints matched what were found at the scene. But I really don't even understand the logic, so it's like, okay, but how did their blood and brain matter get on David's boots? And then you have the forensic experts who are like, no, based on the volume and the shape and all that stuff, nah, dude, whoever was wearing these boots had to have been right by Bill and Julia as they were being killed. So I don't understand the defense's strategy with that. That would be my question if I was on the jury. But whatever. The prosecution had, again, tried to get Alex to rat out on David, but he just wouldn't do it. He really did not want to be a snitch. Not only did he think that whatever time would be shaved off of his sentence would be insignificant, he really did not want to get a reputation behind bars of being a snitch. He was really, terrified of that. So the prosecution did still have the blood on David's boots and other circumstantial evidence. And of course, that included, his many boasts to his friends and girlfriends about how he wanted to kill Kimberly, and how he wanted to commit a major crime before he was 18 years old. The same list of witnesses that were called in Alex's trial were also called in David's, in addition to 2 of David's ex-girlfriends, Amren and Danielle. Danielle was said to be a pretty effective witness. She was pretty good on the stand. She spoke about her past with David, his relationship with Alex, and the many times David had talked about, murder. Quote, "Yes, he did. When I was hanging around him and dating him, he talked many times about that. He specifically said he had done research and he was going to commit a murder before he turned 18. I think 8 or 9 times he told me. He casually mentioned he knew the laws and knew how to get around them." And it was said David scowled at her throughout most of her testimony. She continued, quote, "He said he wanted to experience the power of killing someone in his own hands. He was unhappy with the situation he was in, and he wanted to experience some change in his life. He talked in detail. He said it was going to be very violent. He said it was going to be a very special murder, and he wanted his victims to feel pain. He wanted them to experience the pain he felt all his life." And she talked about the weapons David said that he would use, including knives and his baseball bats. He had played baseball and was skilled. He said he was going to use a metal baseball bat and had a large collection of knives, and he said he was skilled at baseball and would show off his skill. Now, the defense tried to get Danielle to admit that, oh, you're only here testifying against David because he, broke up with you and, went out with, your best friend Amren, right? But, Danielle insisted, no, that's not true at all. Yeah, the book said that she was a very reliable, very effective witness. The defense, I guess, was pretty aggressive in their cross-examination, and apparently that didn't look too good for them. And then Amren testified, pretty much reiterating what Danielle had. It's what she had done in Alex's trial as well. Another friend named Heather Herberg also took the stand, and she testified that one day she was playing at the park, and David just told her that he was planning to murder a family. Now, it was said during his trial, David took very studious notes, often looking back to see who had come to support him and whatnot, and he was constantly whispering and talking to his attorneys, and a lot of those discussions ended with David just shaking his head. So only 4 days after the trial began, David tried to dismiss Coker, saying that he wasn't listening to him about the questioning of witnesses and defense strategies and all that jazz, so he wanted to dismiss him. But Judge Spearman just told him, quote, "There's no doubt a defendant's input is important and should be considered by counsel, but the decisions about how one's witness is cross-examined is best left up to his lawyer." Bob Boyd and his father Ron testified, and their testimony was very crucial because it would lock David into a timeline, remember? So remember, Bob testified that he saw Alex and David leave the house that night around 10:30. And Ron, who worked graveyard shifts as a truck driver, testified that he saw Alex come home at 3:30 a.m. and who was with him? None other than David. So Marcia testified, and she read that journal entry of David's where he talked about he was scared Alex was planning to do to him what he planned to do to Kimberly. She had found it in a box of all stuff, and she had turned it over to police. Mike, David's older brother, also reluctantly testified. And yeah, he did not want to testify. He was testifying for the prosecution. He didn't even want to do any pre-trial interviews or anything. But Judge Spearman pretty much forced him. He was like, well, you either do the interviews or you sit in jail. He recounted his night that he had gone dancing, had come home, had woken Marcia up to see if she wanted to go to Denny's, and she did. And so they went to Denny's, and they came home about 5:30 that morning. And David was already home and asleep. David's friend, Mike Dickinson, also testified. Remember, that was the friend that stayed the night at David's, and he was boasting what he was going to do. He testified to exactly what we went over. And then he also recounted when they were at the downtown youth center, and David was again talking about that. So he reiterated all of that for the court. But get this, guys, get this. On Thursday, March 4th, 1999, a mistrial was declared after the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. Right? Isn't that shocking? They had tried to deliberate for 8 days, and finally they had to come and be like, we can't come to a decision. They were stuck on a vote of 11-1 on conviction. And the single holdout was a juror named Lynette Inman from Kirkland, Washington. And allegedly, she had a grudge with the police and the judicial system and all that stuff. And she had a real axe to grind. And according to the other jurors, she had pretty much made up her mind before deliberations had even begun. She wouldn't budge whatsoever. Other jurors came out and said, yeah, she stonewalled them and all that stuff. They claimed she refused to convict David because she had a really nasty divorce from her ex-husband, who was a cop. And so she had this mistrust of police. And later that summer, Lynette tried to file a lawsuit against King County, or specifically the King County's prosecutor's office, and against Beard, citing defamation and emotional distress. She claimed Beard, who had done an interview where he said she had sabotaged the case, had caused her undue stress and harm, and she was seeking $350,000 compensation. However, the suit went nowhere because she didn't have a case, and it was dismissed. So a week and a half after the mistrial was declared, David fired Coker, citing irreconcilable differences between him and his legal representation. So David's second trial was held that same year on October 11th, and it was presided over by Judge Jeffrey Ramsdell. The defense was now led by Pete Connick, but Stephen Isla was still on the defense team. And they tried to argue, that David was completely innocent in the murders, hadn't participated at all, and that damning blood that was found on David's boots, well, those boots, the blood on them, they had been planted there in David's room by the real killer. That was their defense strategy. It was thought David himself would take the stand to testify, but I guess his lawyers had to practically, tackle him to prevent him from doing that. The prosecution laid out the case that they had in the first trial, only this time, they really tried to narrowly focus on the evidence they had against David. They had, once again, tried to get Alex to implicate David, but he still refused. And Connick tried to delay the trial the very first day by requesting a change of venue. He had requested this in September, and Judge Ramsdell had shot him down then. And Ramsdell also denied his request now. In fact, I guess this was Connick's strategy. He was known for attempting to delay trials through objections, motions. He had a reputation not being an actual lawyer who fought with the facts. He tried to do stall tactics. He even objected 19 times during Prosecutor Eakes' opening statements. Opening statements 19 times. Connick almost got himself sanctioned when he violated a previous court order that stated Kimberly's sexual orientation was strictly off limits. It was not to be brought up at all. And Erin, who, remember, was a friend of Kimberly, she went on a walk with her the night that she ended up being killed. Well, she testified in Alex's trial and in David's first trial, and she came and testified in his second trial as well. And so when she was on the stand the second time in the second trial, Isla was cross-examining her, and he forced Erin to state that Kimberly and Sarah had been in a sexual relationship, or at least romantically or intimately involved. And Judge Ramsdell and the prosecution were extremely upset about this, and Ramsdell said, quote, "This is a violation of motion eliminae. End of story. This is a little disconcerting. I'm disinclined to decide whether sanctions are appropriate at this point. I don't want to make a rash judgment, but the issue is on the table, and I think we're all on notice, and I won't tolerate it anymore." Another surprise to the defense came from the testimony of someone named Marissa Katz. Katz. Isn't that a cool name? Marissa Katz. I like that name. She was one of the Wilsons' neighbors. So she was 17 at this time, and when she's testifying at David's second trial, she was 17 years old. So she was about 14 or so when the murders happened. So I guess she had testified in David's first trial as well, but in the second trial, she added something to her testimony that she hadn't previously. She claimed to have seen David in front of the Wilson home the Monday after the murders. And of course, there was still a bunch of press and cameras and all kinds of commotion still going on, right? And Marissa said that she was among the people in the crowd, and she was standing about 10 feet from David, watching the reporters give their newscasts, watching everything going on, and right? And she testified now that David looked at her at that moment, and she got a weird, creepy feeling, so she headed back to her house. So a detective was in her home, I think interviewing her mom or something, and Marissa came inside, and she told the detective and her mom who she thought might have done it, David. So, as you can imagine, this was a huge blow to the defense, and Connick tried to get a mistrial, since, this was the very first time anyone, even the prosecution, had heard about this from Marissa. Instead, Judge Ramsdell just instructed the jury to just omit Marissa's testimony. During Amron's testimony, Connick again tried to get a mistrial declared, and that was when Beard was questioning her. The way he was questioning her almost elicited her to say David's name. She talked about how she was in gym class when she first heard the news, saw her friend Danielle, and how the two had raced to the principal's office with the information they had. When Beard asked if she had given a name to the McBrides, she answered, quote, "Of whom I believed committed the murders?" And when Beard realized where Ammon was going with that, he just struck the question entirely. But Connick still tried to use that to get a mistrial declared, because attorneys are not allowed to elicit opinions from people on the stand during their testimony about their opinions of guilt or innocence. But again, Judge Ramsdell, shut him down. And at this point, Judge Ramsdell was growing very weary of all the back and forth between the defense and the prosecution. And Marissa's testimony wasn't the only one that changed. Marcia also had an added detail to include in her testimony in the second trial. Even though she had been interviewed at least 5 times by police and had testified in 2 other trials, right? Her testimony never changed until this moment. She spoke more about what she saw when she returned home with Mike that morning around 5:30. She revealed David was asleep, but he was in the clothes he was wearing the night before. Not only that, he was also wearing his black combat boots. Connick again asked for a mistrial, citing that Marcia's testimony thus far had never revealed this detail at all. But the prosecution argued no, wait a minute. No. Marcia did say this in one of her many interviews with the police. And when asked why the prosecution had never brought this up during David's first trial, all Eakes and Beard could say was that there were just so many interviews, so many documents, so much paperwork to sift through with the case that it just got missed. So Ramsdell allowed Eakes to sift through her notes and find the specific interview date, an interview where Marcia disclosed this little detail. And she did, in an interview that took place on September 17th, 1997. It was an interview with Marcia, her mother, Tammy Deasy, the prosecutors, and Detective Gomez. And that interview was where Marcia let slip that David was wearing his boots. Now, Connick tried to insist that the defense never had access to this information or to these interviews, but Eakes said, yeah, they did. And so a bitter back and forth ensued, with Connick accusing, Eakes and the prosecution of being dishonest and mistrustful and stuff. He also accused Beard of, doctoring his notes, specifically the notes that contained that detail about Marcia and David's boots. But Ramsdell just refused anything that Connick had to say. He was like, no, I'm not declaring a mistrial. He offered the defense to, you can cross-examine Marcia, you can re-interview her if you want. But Connick was just insistent that the prosecution were all liars and that sanctions should be placed on them. And Judge Ramsdell refused. So, I remember Kimberly's friend that she saw that movie One Fine Day with, Nanda Prabhakar? I hope I said her name right. Remember her? Well, she testified. She did not testify at Alex's trial or David's first trial. She was a new witness for the state, and she revealed what happened in that interaction with her, Kimberly, and David that day when they got out of the movies. So after the movies, the 2 girls had gone to the mall so Kimberly could call her parents. And while they were there, they ran into David and Sarah coming out of the mall. Now, according to Nanda, they exchanged initial greetings, and then Kimberly just reminded David that he owed her money. Wasn't being bitchy or emotional or anything. It was just kind of like a fact. Like, yeah, you owe me money. Quote, I would say she was not angry or confrontational, but at the same time, she was not happy that David still owed her a sum of money. She said David's demeanor was, quote, he seemed rather indifferent, not confrontational, just acknowledging that this was in fact true. So I guess what was so damning about Nanda's testimony for the defense was that it corroborated Marcia's testimony when she said she was working at the Victoria Mall that Friday when David had asked to borrow her stepfather's pickup truck. And this was also another example for the prosecution on how David had lied to police. He said he hadn't seen Kimberly at all since Christmas of 1996. Nanda's testimony also pointed out, right, that not only did David and Kimberly interact the day that she was killed, but the debt was brought up. So that was at the forefront of his mind. All throughout the trial and testimonies, Connick kept trying to get a mistrial declared, kept accusing the prosecution of lying and all this stuff. I guess there was another case that Prosecutor Eakes was actively trying at the same time. It was like a murder for hire case. And the suspect in that case was also in the King County Jail with David, and Connick, with no evidence whatsoever, claimed that Prosecutor Eakes was working with that suspect to get a confession out of David behind bars. And of course, Judge Ramsdale completely dismissed this, like, bro, what? Come on, dude. What? How desperate are you? Even more new evidence was brought to light during the second trial, which was so shocking to me. Isn't that weird? This included the Wilsons' phone bill. So it was brought to Detective Gomez by Bill's sister. Her name was Gail Harris, and she was the executor of the Wilsons' estate. So the phone bill showed that a half hour before she'd be killed, an outgoing call was placed from the Wilson home to Germany, and it was just before 2 a.m. It turns out Julia was calling a friend. It was a foreign exchange student who had stayed with them as part of like an exchange program, and so that's who she had called. This meant that Julia had to have been killed after 2:30 a.m. when she ended the call, but before 3:30 a.m. when Ron Boyd saw David and Alex come back home. And it also added to the prosecution's further assertion that like more than one killer had attacked this family, because how could one person attack 4 people completely unscathed? Not to mention the amount of time that it would take as well, right? Another new witness was come out of the woodwork during David's second trial. Her name was Megan Varner, and her testimony was thought to echo that of Danielle and Amron's. David had boasted to her about murder and all that as well. But before she even took the stand, Connick wanted, you guessed it, a mistrial, complaining that new evidence was coming to light, new witnesses, and we're pretty much like a discovery process, and what's up with this, you know? And Judge Ramsdale did sympathize with the defense. Quote, if there's continuing discovery, it changes the trial process as the trial is going. It seems to me there has to be some point where discovery is too late. The frustrating part for me is that something always keeps coming up and we have to do it on the fly. And Beard countered that, like, the prosecution had no idea that any of this new evidence would come to light. They had no idea these new witnesses would come out of the woodwork, had no idea that witnesses would add stuff to their testimony. They had no idea either. They were caught just as off guard. It's just that, you know, this stuff kind of worked in their favor. And the surprises kept coming. So a blood forensic expert from the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab named Kirsten Gleam, or maybe it's Gleim, testified about the blood that had been found on David's boots. Now, her testimony was crucial for the defense. And let me tell you why. So get this. Remember how they found those bloody shoelaces in Alex's trash can? Well, listen to this. The defense was running with the theory that Alex had actually taken David's boots that night and put them on, and that it was Alex's shoelaces in the boots, and that's why there was blood on David's boots and blood on those shoelaces in Alex's room. Completely ignoring the shoe print left on Bill's back that did not match David's boots. But for that to work, right, they needed Kirsten here to testify that there were no blood on David's shoelaces, right? Well, what do you think she testified to at trial? Yep, she found blood on David's shoelace. It was a microscopic piece of blood, but it was there. The problem is, though, this right here hadn't shown up in any of her reports. So this, of course, took the defense by surprise, and for the 7th time, Connick tried getting a mistrial declared. Judge Ramsdale denied it. He denied a continuance for the defense, because, like, Connick wanted to review her findings, but Judge Ramsdale was like, no. The defense also did not want Kirsten recalled as a witness, but that was also shot down when, in transcripts from David's first trial, another forensics expert with the Washington State Crime Patrol Lab, or Patrol Crime Lab, named Terry McAdam, had testified that there had been blood on the boot's shoelaces, just like Kirsten had. However, when Terry was called as a witness, his credibility, like with Kirsten, was put into question, and it was put into question when it was pointed out, like, none of your other reports reported this. What's up with that? And so this point right here would be a major point of contention for the jury. Like, do we believe these blood experts? Do we not? Like, that was a huge point of contention for the jury. The defense tried to bring in other friends of David who, like him, collected, like, swords, knives, was into fantasy and stuff, pretty much showing that, like, it's just like a hobbyist collection. Just because someone collects swords and knives doesn't mean that they're a murderer. Sarah was called by the defense to testify, but at this point in time, she had to testify via phone because she was 9 months pregnant with her second child, and she couldn't travel at all, so she had to, be interviewed through the phone. She proved to be just as unreliable and flighty and flaky as before, and it was so obvious to everyone that she knew more than what she was telling. And she contradicted herself numerous times. Like, I'm not even sure if there was a sentence where she didn't contradict herself. And finally, after only several hours of deliberations, David was convicted on Friday, December 17th, 1999 on all charges. He too was sentenced to the same as Alex, and David's parents were in attendance. Although they didn't, speak to the press, they did talk to Connick, who did talk to the press. And he said that they were convinced that their son had been wrongfully convicted. Quote, no question about it, he's innocent. And so, right, they're sitting behind bars, and decades pass, right? And in 2016, something happens. So in 2016, after maintaining his innocence for 20 years, David finally admitted his guilt. But he only did it so that he could take advantage of a Supreme Court decision that had come down in 2012. It was known as the Miller decision. And in case you don't know, it determined that life sentences without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. And then the Washington State Supreme Court had ruled that automatic life sentences for juveniles was unconstitutional months after the Miller decision. And yeah, that's why David decided to admit he was guilty so he could take advantage of this. So when, since they ruled that that was unconstitutional, a resentencing hearing had to be held, right? And so a resentencing hearing for David was held in late February of 2022, and it was before King County Superior Court Judge Michael Scott. Not that Michael Scott. And on March 11th, 2022, David was officially resentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 33 years, and he is not eligible for earned release time. The prosecution was led by King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg, and he was originally seeking 45 years. Quote, when you see the gruesome details of this case, the calculated, senseless slaughter of family members just for the thrill of it, you can never get those horrific images out of your mind. When we prosecuted in this case, the court was well aware that David Anderson was 17 at the time and that he purposefully killed the entire family before his 18th birthday to avoid more serious punishment. I understand that the law has changed, but the life sentence that had been originally imposed was the right sentence in my opinion. The prosecutor's office also said that they were legally required to request less than 46 years. That's why Satterberg went for 45. And this was due to a 2021 Washington state law, and it had something to do regarding youthful offenders. David's lawyer at this resentencing was David Montez, and he had tried getting 25 years. And it looks like Washington State's Indiscriminate Sentencing Review Board will ultimately be the ones to decide if David does get out after 33 years based on his risk to the community. But they cannot legally hold him behind bars after 45 years. And the board can impose up to 3 years of community supervision, which I think is their version of parole. But it looks like they will be the ones to ultimately determine if David gets out after 33 years or 45. The latest articles I could find about all this were dated in March of 2022. And at that time, all the articles were just about David. I couldn't find anything about Alex being resentenced or anything, although I'm going to assume he would also be resentenced, right? When something comes down like that, it's an automatic thing, right? And I only bring it up because the article I was reading went out of its way saying that Alex had not bothered filing any, paperwork or documentation for a resentencing hearing. But like, I would imagine things kind of like automatic, right? But I couldn't find any information on Alex's resentencing. But it was expected that his resentencing would, be similar to that of David's. David is currently incarcerated at the Monroe Correctional Complex, and Alex is serving his time at the Callan Bay Correction Center. And oh my God, that was the Bellevue murders, perpetrated by David Anderson and Alex Baranyi. This case is wild. Thank you so much to @HeyHeyYou for suggesting this case to me. You suggested a few others that I am also looking at. And man, it's just what a whole family, because these two shitheads like wanted to like murder. It's just beyond senseless, right? Like, I mean, all murder is senseless, but this especially so. There was like no motive, And quite honestly, like, I don't know if David should be released. Like, I find it very dubious that he only confessed in 2016 after he saw that it would be to his advantage after maintaining his innocence. Like, I don't know. I don't know if he's changed behind bars. We can only hope, because he is going to be out, relatively soon. I tend to have more sympathy, and just for me, it's my personal opinion, I tend to have more sympathy for Alex just because he came from a really fucked up environment with like really terrible, neglectful parents. But it doesn't excuse it, right? Because there are plenty of people who grew up in neglectful, abusive households that don't end up murdering. But like, yeah, I do feel a little sympathy for Alex. I wonder if he does have some neurological disorders. I do think he was more of the follower. I think David is and was the main instigator. I think it was mainly David, and I think he knew that Alex, was very malleable, was very, able to be manipulated and controlled. And I think that's what David was looking for. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's so awful how Kimberly's family, like, died. I mean, it's awful how she died too, but like, oh my God, like, being stabbed to death, like, oh, poor Julia. Like, oh, I was reading that and I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's awful. And yeah, man, I don't know. What do you guys think? Should David and Alex get out? Like, what are your thoughts? I'm totally curious. Like, this is a very complex, complicated issue, right? Yeah, you can't sentence juveniles. Life with no parole or death penalty. Like, that is unconstitutional. But like, what do you do in a case like this? They were 17. They knew that they would get lesser for doing it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. It's complicated. It's sad. I don't know. The only thing we can hope for, right, is that the two assholes learn to be rehabilitated, because that's what our jail system is for, right? And that they won't be a danger to the community. I don't know, man. Remember, this is the book that I got a bulk of my information from, Deadly Secrets by Putsata Riang. I hope that's how you say her name. I hope that's right. But yeah, I would say my biggest beef with this book is just, not enough, like, concrete, elaborate details. Like, she kind of just like throws stuff in there, like, oh yeah, they just happened to find the black shirt in like Julie's bedroom. I'm like, whoa, what? When did that happen? When did this happen? Like, that was probably my main complaint with this book. But yeah, I had a lot of information. The newspaper articles are really lacking in this case. So it was nice to have a book to really get, how I like that in-depth, like, knowledge. I want to know who these people are. Like, what were their circumstances that led them to this, Oh man, I am tired and hungry, so I am going to leave you off here. Remember, I will be back in 2 weeks with another case. This one is, the next case we'll cover, I've got some thoughts. I've certainly got some thoughts that I will discuss with y'all. So yeah, I think that is it. Hope y'all enjoyed my new setup here. I'm already thinking of some things that I'm gonna slightly change around, but yeah, thought it was nice to kind of, show some of my makeups. Yeah, still looking pretty haggard because I did not sleep last night, so I'm gonna go eat and maybe take a nap. I hope you have a wonderful 2 weeks. I hope you take care out there, stay safe and happy and healthy, all that good stuff. And remember, when you're out there in the world, believe me, I know it's difficult, but just don't be a dick. I mean, you can be a dick to dicks, like if someone's being a dick, right, to someone else, but like, just don't be an asshole, all right? Like, dealing with service workers, dealing with anyone, just don't be an asshole, all right? Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. Alrighty, y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you for being patient. I am so sorry that I ducked out. Part of the medical issues I was trying to take care of was finding out what was causing. I had a really bad allergy. I had eczema and contact dermatitis all over my arms and legs. And after paying over $1,000 with insurance, I found out that I'm allergic to like a lot of common ingredients and stuff like laundry detergent, lotions, creams, makeup. I had to throw away probably like $300 worth of foundations and concealers and bronzers. My allergist gave me the site Skin Safe, and she loaded up my profile in there with like what I'm allergic to. And now I just go in there, and before I buy makeup, I now have to put in the product in Skin Safe, and it tells me if I can use it or not. Yeah, so that was very, very stressful. I've also had some other stuff, like I've gotten into therapy and some other like personal mental stuff going on. So yeah, it's just been a lot. It's been a lot. So thank you so much for putting up with my absence. Sorry, I just dipped there. But yeah, man, just had a lot going on. Oh, one thing I did want to let you know, a movie that I was a casting assistant on is now in theaters. It's called Dogman. It's a Luc Besson film. It is so good. The lead actor, Caleb Landry Jones, I believe, is so good. But yeah, I got my first credit like in a movie, like me and my casting director, we went and saw it, and it was like really cool. So yeah, if Dogman is playing in a theater near you, you should totally go see it because it's really, really good. Alrighty, I will now let you go. Talked your ear off enough. Have a good 2 weeks, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.